If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
What's a true creepy and terrifying horror story you've personally experienced or encountered?
This happened in my late teens. I was with a group of friends, and we decided to go camping. We always pick the same spot. Simply because it's remote and it's by the river that runs out of the lake. There is one road in and one road out. It's desolate. No cell service, and on either side of the road are steep drops. It's so steep and rocky that it is hard to fathom anyone hiking up either side. There is a spot perfect for fishing under a little bridge that is on this road. We set up camp, and it begins to get dark, so we decide we are going to do some catfishing and gather our things. All four of us head back up to the bridge. We get to the point where the bridge is in view when one friend nudges me and nods toward the bridge. There was a black figure pacing back and forth along the bridge. It was like a person, but it was so tall and skinny. Almost distorted looking. Like if you took a person and stretched them out taller. It was almost totally dark, but the figure was clearly outlined against the moonlight. It's burned in my brain. We nope right out of there and start back down to our campsite, thinking we can at least find safety in our vehicle. We make it about halfway back to our camp and see a huge fire in the middle of the road. It takes up a good 3/4 of the little dirt path. One of my friends managed to find a small but treacherous path around. We thankfully didn't have a lot of camping supplies, and we threw them in the truck, loaded up, and drove back, assuming we would have enough water/liquids to put the fire out with our ice chest full of half-melted ice and gallon jugs of water. We roll up to where the fire was, and it's out. There is just a blackened spot in the road. We have not been back there. I don't know what that was about. I'm sure it was some person messing with us. But I don't know how they managed to do the stuff they did. Don't really care. It still scares the crap out of me. I have twice in my life encountered something I cannot identify that has identified me as a Wendigo. I was out backcountry camping. Not terribly far out, but far enough off the beaten track that I know there were no people within 5 kilometers. For the record, no drugs or alcohol, not overly tired, and if I had only been once in my life, I would write it off as a dream or misremembered memory. Late at night, I started feeling a little thirsty. I cleared out my water bottle and figured I would walk down to the nearby river to fill it up. This way, the chlorine tablets could work overnight, ensuring I'd have clean water by morning. The water could be just a 5-minute hike away from my camp. There, by the water, lit only by the moon, is an animal. I aim my flashlight at my feet to avoid tripping. It's got 4 legs and appears dark/black. I'm going through the list in my head. Too thin for a black bear. It's hard to imagine anything else that could be so dark. And then it stood up. I can only describe it as a muscular coyote, with no fur, black skin, long arms, and judging by the trees it was standing near, about 7 feet tall. It looked at me. I looked at it. That was not a coyote. It was not a bear. I don't know what it was, but I sure as hell wasn't going to find out in the middle of the night. I kept facing it, backed away slowly until I was out of line of sight, got back to my camp, packed up my shit, and left. Some years later, and about 1,000 kilometers away, I had a second encounter. Late at night, I'm walking down a dirt service road near a farm. A head emerges from the weed and gazes at me. I recognize that shape. It wasn't looking at me. I shouted, "Hey, don't mind me, I'm just going that way." It looked at me. The head disappeared in the wheat. Nope, the duck out of there. I don't know what I saw. It doesn't match anything I've ever seen. I've since had the chance to speak to some people about it. The answer I get is a wolf or coyote with mange. No way. Ears were wrong, and those arms were too long, aside from the way it stood. I don't claim it was supernatural or some undiscovered cryptid. But I don't go walking in the moonlight in the backcountry of the Rockies anymore. Back when I was in the Army, we ran into something pretty unexplainable during a regular navigation exercise. So navigation exercises are pretty standard throughout the world. Using a map and coordinates, you must locate checkpoints with a compass. Of course, each squad was given a signal set to use in case of emergencies. Or just to add to the weight they had to lug around. It's part of their kit anyway. There's a GPS embedded inside, but it's old school and gives coordinates only. Close to the end of the exercise, a squad had fallen hopelessly behind, but they were on their way to the last checkpoint. So I was responsible for the last checkpoint with another fellow instructor. We knew they were around us in a 1-kilometer radius. Couldn't spot them due to foliage. We waited, and we waited for about 1 to 2 hours. You don't mess up so frigging bad that you can't figure out a checkpoint that's 1 kilometer away. We radioed them and did not get a reply until half hour after the initial call. They were frantic. Seems like they were walking around in circles and seeing similar landmarks. It was apparently pitch dark where they were, and this was around 6 p.m., when the sun was only starting to set. I and the other trainer told them not to move, and we hiked to their position using an electronic GPS. And at the coordinates given, we found no one. The forest was also eerily quiet. There were no insects or birds to disturb the silence. It was pretty unnerving. The radio set was silent. Not even static was coming out. We radioed them again, and they said they were at the same coordinates as us, but I saw no one. We decided to hike back to the checkpoint and wait. We gave them the coordinates to the checkpoint. About an hour later they emerged. It took them 4 hours plus to find a checkpoint like 1 kilometer away. During the final briefing, one of them told me they seemed to walk around in circles. They kept leaving marks on trees using a blade, but when they came back to what should have been the tree that they marked, the mark was gone. They also felt like they were being followed. But that should just be the forest and exhaustion playing tricks on them, right? My parents bought a house from a man quite a few years ago. He had some major issues and even attempted ending self in the basement. After my parents bought the house, his ex-wife ran into my mom one day and asked if we had met Mabel yet. She claimed Mabel was the ghost that lived in the house and said she would sometimes wake up at night to the feeling of someone stroking her hair or cheek. Apparently Mabel had burned to death. Though we never actually looked into this. We didn't really think much of it for a while, but come the winter months, weird things would start happening in the house. One morning my mom woke up to the stove being turned on, another morning she left to do some groceries and came home to half a cup of coffee sitting on the counter. She hadn't made coffee because she had gone to a friend's house for coffee that morning, and our dog, who was mostly an inside dog, was outside. In -40-degree weather. My sister and I were at school, and my dad was at work. All the doors were locked when she came home, so it couldn't have been someone who snuck into the house. On another occasion I was in the garage grabbing firewood and had to walk across the double garage to get to the woodpile. At the time we had a cow hanging in there before we were to have it cut and wrapped. As I'm grabbing an armful of wood, the garage light switched off. The door was really heavy and squeaky, so I would have known if someone had opened the door to shut off the light. The strangest thing that happened, though, again happened in the winter months. My mom and I were in the kitchen preparing dinner. She was on the phone with a friend when we started smelling smoke. She got off the phone, and we started searching the house to see where it was coming from. Turns out some papers in the bottom of a box in my bedroom closet were burning. We were the only ones home that day. While we lived there, we would hear footsteps going up and down the 4 flights of stairs, walking up and down the hallway. Sometimes our dog would suddenly wake from her sleep and growl at a specific area. Looking back on it, it was really quite an intriguing house. It was known in town for being creepy, and apparently the title was very fitting for the house. I was driving home from visiting a friend who lived several hours away from me, 6 hours to be exact. I hadn't seen my friend in a very long time, and instead of leaving early from my visit, like I should have, I left their place at like 8 p.m. I messaged my husband when I left and told him not to wait up for me, as I wouldn't be home until almost 3 a.m. We said goodnight, and he asked me to drive safely. The highways that I would take to get home aren't major thoroughfares. I live in rural Canada, so 90% of my drive would be on small, 2-lane highways. It's actually a beautiful drive through gorgeous countryside. I'm about 4 hours into my drive when things start to go awry. I'm literally in the middle of nowhere when my GPS starts acting up. After about 5 minutes, the thing literally just dies on me. No problem though, I'll just use my phone. No sooner did I load the directions on my phone than it started acting up. Screen flashing on/off, the coordinates started spinning, really weird shit. Then, just like the GPS, it just died. Still not a huge deal, I'm only a couple of hours from home, I can find my way. So I turn on the radio. I had been listening to my music on my phone, but it died. Normally, at this distance from the city, you can still pick up a station or two. However, there was nothing to be heard, only this strange static. The stars are so bright on a clear, calm summer night away from the city. But literally, out of nowhere, this weird green fog started to appear. As I continued driving, the fog got thicker, to the point I was only driving like 40 kilometers per hour on a highway. I was literally just doing 120. Then, literally out of nowhere, my car died while driving. I drove a standard, so I just threw it in neutral to coast as far as possible. When I finally came to a complete stop, the fog seemed so thick, it felt like it was inside the car. I could barely see my hands on the steering wheel, and it had a terrible taste. Before I knew it, daylight had broken and 2 CN workers were yelling at me. I remained in a daze, Experiencing a sense of immobility. The workers are screaming at me. I guess my car's parked on private railroad property. They ask how I got past security with my car. Why am I there? I couldn't answer. I literally had no idea where I was. They instructed me to leave immediately to avoid calling the police and filing trespassing charges. I tried to explain what happened. I told them the car died on the side of the highway. I went to start my car to show them it was dead, and after some heavy hesitation, it finally started. I couldn't believe where I was. I was literally inside a CN rail yard. How the duck did I get here? There was a 9-foot fence surrounding the compound and a locked security gate at the front. I asked the worker where I was, and when he told me, I was in disbelief. I was at least 100 kilometers from where I last remembered. As I'm driving out, I instantly remember my husband. He must be worried sick. What the duck time is it even? How the duck did I get here? My phone was still completely dead, so I couldn't message him. When I finally got home, it was 3 p.m. I tried to explain what happened to my husband, and he was in total disbelief. We both were. I went to the phone store the next day to see if they could fix my phone. They said it might take a week or so, but it was repairable. The very next day I noticed something was wrong. I felt extremely unwell. My hair seemed to be falling out, and I started to get a really bad rash. So we went to the hospital. I told the hospital what happened to me a couple of days earlier, and they thought I was joking. It wasn't until my blood work came back an hour later that they took me seriously. I had radiation poisoning. They immediately put me in an isolation room. Before they declared me non-radioactive, I spent a total of 21 days in the hospital. And when I got my phone back from the cell phone company, the last time my GPS pinged, it said I was 4,000 feet in the air. I was hanging out at my girlfriend's, house late at night. Her parents and siblings were asleep. We were just hanging out conversing with the TV volume on low. I heard a voice that sounded distant but felt like it was close by. I shook it off as nothing and continued conversing. A few minutes go by, and once again I hear the same thing, distant but close. This time it was a dark-sounding voice. I've never heard anything like this in my life, and it sounded so clear. Me not wanting to scare my friend with what I hear, I act as if the TV was distracting me, so I asked them to turn it off, but I really just wanted to hear this voice clearly if it came up again. Conversations continue. This time, she stops talking, gets up, and walks to check on her parents and siblings. She comes back, confused, but we start talking once again. It's getting late, so we wrap up our conversation. In the back of my mind, I'm freaking out and wondering if I should say anything because I might look crazy. I hold off on saying anything. I get back on my bike and ride back home. I get home, and she texts me. She was like, it was really weird, when I got up to check on everybody, they were all in deep sleep. But I heard something. This is when I let her know that I heard something as well. I described what I heard, and she said she heard the same thing. But when she heard it, it said my name. I had never been so freaked out in my life. I couldn't sleep. It's the next morning, 12 hours later. I'm at home alone, and I'm sitting in my bed. Behind my left shoulder is the entrance to my room. Out of nowhere, from the corner of my eye, I see a shadow glide down the hallway. It seemed to be moving swiftly, like it was running. My heart sank. I am not sure if the two instances were related to one another, but I feel they were. I can't believe it was just a coincidence. I don't know if there was something following me within that 12-hour span, but it was the most freaked out I've ever been. When I was 17, I was hanging out with two friends, and they wanted to go smoke weed in the woods. I didn't feel like it, so I drove them and waited in the car. After a while I was getting bored and decided to go meet them, but there were 4 paths going off in different directions, so I just took the biggest one. After walking for a few minutes in the pitch-black forest, before flashlights on phones, I come across this dip in the trail, and on the other side is a bench lightly visible due to the moonlight. A man sits on the bench, and another man stands in front of him, but all I can see are silhouettes. Thinking these might be my friends, I call out to them before approaching. I was careful at first because walking in the woods at night is just an uneasy feeling. Well, it turns out, just after yelling out to my friends, both silhouettes turn around towards me. Not a word, not a sound, the guy sitting down starts sprinting full ducking speed towards me in complete silence. I got the absolute duck out of there, sprinting also the other way and tripping over shit because I couldn't see anything. I finally got out and locked myself in my car, but I was really worried for my friends. Maybe a minute later, I see them both coming out of a completely different path. They also confirmed they never saw me or anyone else. My heart still sinks just thinking about that dude sprinting in silence, WTF was that shit? Now I unfortunately do not have a very interesting life, so I have no stories of my own. However, I do have a very interesting story from my uncle. My uncle lives in West Virginia, one of the more remote states in the eastern United States. While his main house is in town, he also has a small cabin up on Spruce Mountain, where he and my aunt would go during the summers. This cabin is very remote and accessed only by jeep trails and isn't connected to the electrical grid. So my aunt and uncle decided to take advantage of a 3-day weekend sometime in the late 80s and headed out to the cabin for some fly fishing and relaxation in the woods. They took my uncle's '74 Bronco, as that was the only vehicle able to get up the mountainside. When they arrived, my aunt went out to do some sketching while my uncle unpacked and built a fire in the cabin, as it was already getting dark. As night began to fall, my uncle noted how unusually quiet the woods were. He has been camping, canoeing, and backpacking all over the world, and he still says that this is the quietest he has ever heard them. What happened next is the part I still don't quite believe, but I have it here exactly as my uncle told it to me. He and my aunt go to bed, and the fire dies. My uncle awoke to a strange thumping coming from outside. This quickly woke the dog, which ran under the bed. He thought it probably was a bear and grabbed his .444 Marlin to go deal with it. As he pulled the gun out from its case, the door on the outside swung open, and a large hairy shape appeared silhouetted in the moonlight. He said he never quite got a good look at it, but the one thing he really remembers is the overpowering smell, a stench of decay. He quickly emptied the .444, and while he didn't get a kill shot, he did scratch the beast's arm, which caused it to run squealing into the woods. He and my aunt immediately grabbed their things, got in the Bronco, and hightailed it out of there. Whatever my uncle saw, he claims it was Sasquatch, never really bothered them again, and when he returned in the morning, with more people, and firepower, to retrieve his remaining gear, he found little evidence of any intrusion, except for a single strange footprint. I really don't know whether to believe my uncle or not, as he has several other strange beliefs, most recently that the earth is expanding slowly over time. However, I will be heading up to their cabin for the first time this year, so I'll have to find out for myself. I was maybe 15. It was at one of my friend's houses. For whatever reason, his house was always off. A note, his mom was an overnight nurse and wasn't home that night. There were maybe 5 of us in his living room watching some dumb movie. After the movie ended, they all went upstairs as it was around 1 a.m. I stayed behind because I prefer sleeping in complete darkness, while they need TV shows as background noise to fall asleep. So I'm sitting there in the dark trying to fall asleep, and I start hearing a whisper. The whisper repeats something, growing slightly louder each time. I assume it's the TV show upstairs and ignore it the first 5 or 6 times I hear it. But it keeps getting louder. At some point, I can identify the noise emanating from the kitchen, which is situated 10 feet in front of me. The kitchen is the access point for the basement in the house. The sound keeps repeating louder and louder until I realize it's a warning to leave. I'm shaken and frozen in place, staring into the black void that is the kitchen opening. Eventually it's loud enough that it sounds like a full-grown man with a rumble in his voice is full-on yelling at me to get out. I snap out of his frozen state and run upstairs. They didn't hear anything. After telling them what happened, they tell me that a few weeks prior to this, at the same time, and his mom not being home, one of them thought they saw the other walk down the basement steps, only to walk upstairs and see the friend they thought they saw in the room. Same situation with them being alone in the house. Poltergeist keeps locking my door, pretending to be my family, and I don't know what to do. Please help.
I, a 22-year-old female, rent a room in my parents' home.
For context, the property is a historical home that is approximately 120 years old. Many families have lived in it over the years, and it has undergone numerous refurbishments and renovations. We have had multiple strange encounters at the home since my family moved in back in 2021. When we moved in, my dog refused to use the bathroom in the backyard. She wouldn't even leave the back porch and would get really nervous about going further than that. Even now, she will stare down corners of the house and occasionally bark and growl at my closet, where I have felt a definite presence and energy. Every once in a while, every 1 to 2 months, I will return from work to find my room locked shut. I always shut my door before leaving but never lock it. The lock is just a simple lock where you'd have to turn the tumbler inside of the knob, but not simple enough to do so on accident. When I finally unlock the door, nothing seems to be disturbed, but I am usually very unsettled by it. My brother, who lives in the room right across from me, has reported hearing our mother call him from downstairs when she has not done so. He also claims to see shadows move around the house, and he sometimes gets really freaked out by it. I personally have spoken to it, as it was disguising itself as my father. I was off work and sitting at the kitchen table when I saw the door open and he walked in. I said, "Hey, Dad." To which the spirit replied, "Hi Pumpkin, how's it been?" "This is my dad's nickname for me," I asked, "How was your day?" But my parents ignored me as I entered their bedroom. Around an hour later, my dad actually showed up. I was convinced that he was at home already, to the point I asked my mother about it. While these are just a few examples, the frequency of these events is starting to pick up. I don't know what this thing is or what it wants, but it's really annoying everyone in the house. Any help, suggestions, or advice is wholly appreciated. Up to this day, I'm still looking for a logical explanation for this. This happened in 2003. So I and an ex were checked in at a coastal resort where the cottages were far apart, like 200 meters away. Around 11 to 11:30 p.m., while we're both drinking beer with the lights turned off and only the TV on, the doorknob suddenly rattled violently, like someone was forcibly trying to get it open. There was no double lock on the door, so my first reaction was to jump from the bed and block the door with my weight. The force of my landing must have been heard from the other side, but the twisting of the doorknob continued. By this time I was already pressing my face to the floor, trying to look/estimate how many people were outside the door via the small gap between the floor and the bottom of the door. There was nothing. There was not even a single pair of feet visible. But the doorknob just kept rattling. I should note that the gap between the door and the floor was enough for me to see outside or notice any change in shadow/light caused by movement, but there was nothing. The turning of the doorknob then stopped. But I never heard any footsteps or any other noise. I waited for a few minutes before opening the door. Everything was quiet. No footprints outside or on the sand surrounding the cottage. We just noped out of there immediately. I met somebody who had been traveling Australia with a couple of friends, hitchhiking around as many of us had done. One of his friends told him they were near his distant uncle's house, whom he'd never met before. He got a phone number from a family member, and as they had hoped, the uncle offered them a place to stay. He picked them up in town and drove them out to his rural property way out in the bush. They said he seemed like a pretty normal guy, friendly and cheery. When it was time to set up a place to sleep, the uncle took them to a closet that was totally full of sleeping bags and bedrolls. They didn't think much of it at the time and all grabbed a kit and set up on the living room floor. They stayed for a couple of days, during which nothing unusual occurred. After that, their uncle drove them to the bus station, where they continued their journey. About a year later that man was arrested and charged with several counts of murder. He was the man accused of picking up young hitchhiking backpackers and ending them. The person who told me this story was 100% certain he had slept in the sleeping bag of one of his victims. It wasn't particularly frightening, but it was still a significant experience for us at the time. I used to live in San Antonio, and it was around Halloween, so we wanted to get some scares in. We decided to go see some real haunted asylums and the burned down house of the horse lady. The haunted asylum was pretty lame, so we got GPS coordinates of the horse lady's house, parked as close to it as we could, and started walking. It was in the dead center of some woods. A solid 30-minute walk. There were 6 of us, but a guy and a girl decided not to go in for obvious reasons, and so the 4 of us journeyed onward. It was pitch black, and only 2 of us had phones with about 20-ish battery left. Mine had a light and GPS open, and the other guy kept his phone on him just in case. We walked and walked, and my phone died, but we were only like 5 minutes from the marker. My friend pulled out his phone light, and we saw what could have been the burned down house, but we weren't sure. We heard a weird moan, but we figured it was some animal. Then the girl with us screams. A massive spider swings down in front of us. I mean, this thing was the size of my thumb. Pretty big fella, but whatever. The girl starts crying, and we decide to just go back because it was a bust and it's a 30-minute walk back, plus it was late as hell. We figured we walked in a straight line, so a simple 180 and walking straight back would get us back home. We turned around, the guy flashed his light. I'm not making this up. Hundreds of these big spiders and massive spider webs are around us, as if it happened in the 2 minutes we stood in that spot. There's absolutely no way we walked 30 minutes without touching a single one of these webs. The girl is screaming bloody murder as we try to avoid hundreds of these webs trying to make it back to the vehicle. It took us an hour and 15 minutes to navigate through the webs and spiders, pausing every time we encountered a clear patch to check for spiders. None of us could explain what happened, but we were definitely scared. I accompanied a friend to a cemetery known as the Most Haunted Cemetery in Connecticut where we strolled for a short while, enjoying the atmosphere and laughter. I'll tell you up front that nothing supernatural happened while we were there. Anyway, while she and I are walking around, a motorcycle pulls up, and a man gets off and begins walking around the cemetery as well. It's a small plot of land, there's literally nowhere that my friend and I can go where this person can't see us, so we politely give a little wave and go back to reading headstones. This person took the wave as an invitation to come talk to us, and he began telling us how he rides his motorcycle all over, looking for old cemeteries to check out. While it may seem like a peculiar pastime, we understand that everyone has their own unique interests. We get out of the conversation and go to check out a few more headstones, which puts our backs to this dude, and a few minutes later, we notice he hasn't moved from where he was standing while we were talking. He has his phone in his hand, aimed at us, and we both hear the unmistakable sound of a camera shutter. He fumbles with his phone for a minute and turns around from us, acting like he was taking pictures of headstones. We knew he had our picture on his phone. She and I looked at each other, gave a non-verbal "let's get the duck out of here," and went to my car to drive away. As we get in the car, we see the guy who followed us out of the cemetery sitting on his motorcycle, filming us. While I drove away, my friend watched the mirrors and told me that he never once put the phone down as long as the car was within sight. I hope I never see that creep again in my life. This was a story that my friend from Boy Scouts told me last year. He said that when he lived in Colorado when he was younger, he, his brother, and his parents lived in the Rockies, like just a remote house from the 50s in the middle of the Rockies. He showed us on Google Maps, and it was decently close to Vail, Colorado. His parents bought a house from an old redneck from Arkansas. This dude had owned the property since '87, and it was originally a mining town up there with a big lake and a river. The lake and river will come into play later. The house was in front of the lake, and the river was behind the lake. He said it was about 10 miles of gravel road from the nearest house. And keep in mind my friend was only 7. My friend's family, who I'll just call the Wilsons, moved into this house in 2015, and as soon as they walked into the house, the parents got high on brownies around 7 o'clock or so, and around 9 or so, the parents fell asleep, and my friend Kai and his brother Loki were still awake. Out of curiosity, my friend Kai looked out the window and saw the lake. He then turned his gaze to the river, initially seeing nothing, but then noticing the silhouette of a figure. He described it as a combination of a goat, a human, and a deer. I have no clue, but it scared the crap out of us. He then went and told his brother Loki, and he looked outside and started running to his parents' room screaming and tried to wake them up, but they were knocked out cold. So Kai calms down his brother and puts him to sleep in a windowless room, such as the kitchen. At this point, Loki has fallen asleep. He looks outside and sees the figure again. It's in the exact same position, leading him to believe it might just be a tree, but then it begins to walk through the river it was standing in. But in the direction of the house that Kai was in at this point, he got a better look at it, and it had the legs of a goat with a human-looking chest with goat hair and human arms, as well as a goat head with deer antlers that were red and pulsating like they were hearts beating. Now those sights understandably scared the crap out of him, and he hid in one of the moving boxes that had a couch inside of it. So this 7-year-old kid is being watched by what looks like a demon and is hiding in a moving box, so you can understand how scary that is. Now, he did the only logical thing to do at that age. After about 5 minutes of waiting, he went to his parents' room and attempted to wake them up, but just like earlier, they were rendered unconscious. He glanced out the window again, but saw nothing, so he paced, trying to find a way to hide. Terrified, Kai set up a pallet next to his brother in the windowless kitchen, nearly falling asleep. Then he heard a loud bang coming from the makeshift dumpster that the redneck they bought it from built. That trash can weigh as much as a minivan. Now note that there was a window facing the trash can, but Kai did not look through because he was too busy crying in the little pile of blankets that he was sleeping on. Now we are going to fast forward to the morning after the sleepless night Kai went through. His parents had finally woken up, and Kai told them what had happened. They laughed at him and went to the store to get food. As they walked out, they saw the trash can, grabbed the kids and their stuff, and left. At the time he was telling us this, he had moved to Texas and was surrounded by other Boy Scouts from many different troops at summer camp, and he was still shaking uncontrollably. We all went to sleep like an hour later. There is something in the shadows. When I was 17, I joined the Army. I was sent to southern Georgia for basic training and infantry school. During my tenure, the base I was stationed at provided comprehensive combat arms training, including infantry school, airborne school, and ranger school, among others. It's important you know this because I enlisted during a time when the Army was still practicing archaic, conservative restrictions such as don't ask, don't tell, not allowing transgender persons in at all, and not allowing women in combat arms. These restrictions were both stupid and useless, but I will discuss my disagreements with the Army at a later time. The point is that this base was an isolated facility, more or less exclusively occupied by male soldiers. Near the end of infantry school, I fractured both of my shins and was given 3 choices: medical discharge, stay in but move to more of a desk-type job, or go to a physical therapy and rehabilitation program, PTRP, to heal and try again. I chose the latter. PTRP was on a different part of the base. It was a little removed, and the drill sergeants were more focused on our healing and rehabilitation than on our training and hardening. Consistent throughout my time in the Army was a duty called Fire Watch. Fire Watch is a guard shift that, despite its name, has less to do with the prevention and response to fires breaking out in the barracks and more to do with preventing guys from running away, assaulting each other, or trying to commit suicide. Charming, right? So as it would go, you and your bunkmate, commonly referred to as your battle buddy, or simply battle, would be assigned an hour or 2 of watch at some point throughout the night, and the assignments moved down the bunk roster. There were always 2 of us, one guarding the door and the other silently roving, making sure nothing and no one was out of place. One night, my battle buddy and I pulled watch between 2 and 3 in the morning. It started out as any other watch. Battle took his spot on the door while I roved. There was a notoriously creepy corner of the barracks, located opposite the door and beyond the 4 rows of bunks. The other soldiers would whisper about it in the day, but all they could say was that it was very dark and creepy. Most guys used a flashlight while roving on Fire Watch, but that always woke me up, and I hated it. So, while I roved, I left my flashlight off, allowing my eyes to adjust to the dark and hopefully not interrupting the sleep of my fellow soldiers. As I made my way through the rows of bunks, I turned the corner on the last row. The row is farthest from the door. That corner was exceptionally dark. The kind of thick darkness that goes beyond being devoid of light. It had an unnatural density. This was more than emptiness. This was the kind of darkness that contained something within it. This darkness held something that existed beyond the veil. A kind of beckoning. That was the first impression I had as I made my way down the rows, closer to the corner. Something was building inside me. Every step closer to that corner, I felt more dread seeping up into my body. Like how rain will crawl up your pants legs from the foot, cold and invasive. I was only about 5 bunks down out of about 30 to 40. Every slow, silent step forward was spent not observing the bunks but locked on that corner. I became absolutely certain of 2 things. First was that there was something in that corner that I couldn't see but couldn't look away from. And second, its gaze was fixed on me as well and made me feel hollow. This realization caused the hair all over my body to stand on end, and terror washed over me, pulling me in like gravity. I felt as if every atom in my body was screaming to get away. Screaming against its pull while my feet stepped closer as if no longer under my control. This sensation filling up inside me is difficult to explain. Do you ever experience a profound sense, deeply rooted in your being, a comprehension that surpasses the realm of thought? Did you suddenly realize that the feeling you're experiencing is an absolute truth? That shadow creature just emanated a pulsing feeling and being of sinister wrong. I mean, this is the most wrong anything has ever felt in my life. I had to get away from it. At last, I regained my independence and made the decision to join my combat partner near the door. After very slowly backing out of the row, never turning away from the corner, I thought I would feel better once I got away. I was wrong. The shadow's awareness seemed to remain fixed on me, following me in the darkness that stretched across the ceiling until I reached my friend. At first, I wasn't sure if I would tell the other guy about this. I mean, what could I say? Its inability to be spoken of was a part of the haunting feeling. The shadow had me. I was vulnerable and isolated in its darkness. It claimed me. I tried to shake it off and quietly started a conversation with Battle. Just as I was beginning to feel okay, we heard something that couldn't have been there. The small, soft, almost angelic voice of a child called for its daddy, from outside the very door we stood guard. Daddy, i.e. Benign as it sounds, it's almost 3 in the morning on a training base. Not only should there not be children here, but they certainly shouldn't be awake and looking for their daddy. This was all wrong. My bunkmate and I stared at each other. I ask if he heard that. He says yes and asks if I heard it. I say yes. We stare at each other in silence for a moment before I say the stupidest thing possible. We have to check. I can see on my friend's face that he absolutely hates me right now, his eyes pleading with me not to. I don't blame him because as I reach for the door handle, I'm hating this decision too, but if there is somehow a kid out there, we have to try to help. Slowly, I turn the handle, ready to open the door. I wait, and with our eyes fixed on each other, we count, 1, 2, 3. We open the door and bob our heads in and out as quickly as though they might get shot off. Nothing. The field was empty. Quickly and quietly we closed the door. We locked eyes again, but before we could speak, A sound filled our ears. Child's laughter. The child's laughter had changed from being angelic to a mischievous, wicked giggle that enveloped us. I watched as my friend's eyes gaped with horror, and dread washed over his face. No doubt he saw the same in me. We stood there, ice in our veins, and didn't need to ask if we heard it. We locked the door. We stood next to each other completely still and in total silence for the remainder of our guard shift, then woke the next two to take over without saying a thing about any of it. In fact, we never spoke of it again. I wonder if, wherever he is, it still haunts him too. I cannot explain what we encountered. But whatever was with us that night, it manipulated our emotions. Delighted in frightening us. They made a feast out of our fear. I was a teenager and a stoner. My friends and I would go out to this blocked-off bridge in the middle of the woods to get high. There were so many dead-end signs along the half-mile or so to the bridge that nobody went there unless they were looking for trouble. We climbed the sides, it was a trestle, went underneath it, and really just got familiar with the whole place in the few months we went there. We visited the place multiple times a week. It was fall, around Halloween. 2011. One day we went out there near sunset and saw what appeared to be red pentagrams painted onto the concrete barriers blocking the bridge. As we got closer, we saw more pentagrams and other weird symbols all painted in the same red, on the ground, on the trestles, everywhere. Not spray paint, but something that dripped and smeared a lot. I figured it must have been a group of edgy kids playing with paint cans. We went off to the side, fixing to go down into the creek just to see the extent of the vandalism when we saw a dead calf lying in the ditch weed. Blood was spread all along the blades of grass around it and dribbled up to the road. It also pooled quite a bit in the lower parts of the ground. Definitely dead, but fresh. We'd been there in the last couple of days, and there was no smell even when we got closer. Got out of there fast, and the next time we went down, the whole half-mile of road leading to that bridge was completely blocked off. My best friend and I, since the 5th grade, still talk about this today. In 1988, when I was 16, 3 of my family members, at different times, and my best friend one time, all saw me in different areas of the house when I was not there. My mom saw me walk out the back door just before I walked in the front door. She asked me why I just walked out the back door, then walked around the house and came in the front door. I said, "What are you talking about? I just got home from school. I wasn't here. I didn't walk out the back door. You're scaring me. Who did you see?" She said, "It was you." She became very frightened and said, "Don't tell your dad." The second time, I walked in the house after playing basketball. My little sister told me to cut it out, it's not funny. I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You just keep standing in my doorway talking and laughing. Every time I tell you to go away, you just keep ignoring me. I'm trying to watch TV. I've been out playing basketball. I haven't been in here." She got super scared. The third time this happened, my best friend came over, and my dad let him in. As he approached my room, he observed me exiting my bedroom, entering the bathroom, and closing the door. He decided to wait for me in my room until I came out. But when he walked into my room, there I was sitting on the bed. He freaked out and ran home. He never told me why he got scared and ran until years later. The last time this happened, my best friend and I were at the dining room table eating hot dogs. From where we sat, you could see across the living room to my dad's bedroom. My dad flung the door open and started yelling at me, "Why were you in my room just now? How the hell did you get to the dining room table so fast?" I said, "I wasn't in your room." He said, "Yes, you were." "Why?" I said, "I swear. I don't know what you're talking about." My best friend vouched for me and told him I was never in there. All these things really happened in my home that I grew up in Austin, Texas. My mom passed away in 2011, and my dad is pretty old. But my sister, my best friend, and I are all willing to take lie detector tests. It never happened before or since. I am desperate at this point for answers. I also want to find out where this incident occurred. I'm almost on the verge of being disturbed by this. My best friend and I talk about it on almost a daily basis, 31 years later. My parents bought this old house and had it moved onto the property they bought. We moved in when I was 8. I always knew there was someone else there. I just sensed it. So time goes on, and I started collecting these wind-up musical boxes that were shaped like carousel horses. I had about 5 on top of my bureau. I'm not quite 4 feet 11 inches now, so there was no way I could reach them by myself back then. One night I wake up from a dead sleep to all of them going off simultaneously and then stopping again all at the same time. No one else was in the room, and there's no way they'd all stop like that on their own. I was freaked out but not actually scared. I told my family, but they ignored me, saying I imagined it. Okay. Whatever. Several more years go by, and I'm alone at home, standing on the cabinets in our living room to dust the top shelves when it happens again. Same exact thing with all the music boxes starting and stopping simultaneously. It was in the middle of the afternoon, and there was no way I imagined it. It startled me pretty bad, and I almost fell. For whatever reason, I decided I would politely ask him, just felt masculine to me, to please not do that again because it scared me, and I almost fell and got hurt. Again, my family didn't believe me. After that, it never happened again or anything else. I moved out, and my parents decided to renovate and knock down some walls. Once the construction was done, my parents started hearing loud footsteps walking up and down the hallway. They moved out shortly after and built a new house a mile away. The people who bought our old house called my mother to ask if she had ever heard unexplained footsteps. Guess who believes me now? Also, my dad, parents are divorced, bought a house with 3 bedrooms. He had one, his roommate had one, and I had one. I flat out refused to sleep in my room. I don't know why, but every time I was in that room, I felt this horrible, oppressive heaviness. It was awful. It terrified me. I felt watched. So I slept in the dining room until he got married when I was 15. I still refused to use the dining room, but since my brother's roommate moved out, I used my brother's room when I visited. I had no problem in any other room in the house. When I was 20, they had a baby and made that room into a nursery. Pretty sure he's going to grow up to be a murderous psychopath after spending so much time in that room. I never looked into it, but I think something awful happened in that room at some point, and it left an imprint of the energy. Even as a married adult, I couldn't go in that room without being immediately overwhelmed by darkness, I guess is the only way I know how to put it. When I was 13, my dad and stepmom bought a house about 25 minutes outside of town. This house had many weird things happen in it, but the scariest was probably the first summer there. My cousin was down for a week or 2 visiting. This street used to be called Mount Zion, and about a 35-minute walk down this winding road flanked by trees, there's still a little cemetery that bears the same name. I was always edgy growing up, and at this point, my cousin and I were super into Jackass, so we were kind of assholes in the way we tried to be funny. One day we took a stroll down to the cemetery and were just kind of walking around cracking jokes about some of the names, kicking at, but not damaging, headstones, and just being generally disrespectful of the space without actually being destructive. Some headstones were so old that they were just worn down white rocks sticking out of the ground. The next day we hear my parents talking in the kitchen, kind of in hushed tones, before cutting off the conversation when they realize we're there. It sounds pretty serious, but my stepmom refused to tell me what they were talking about when I asked. I remember her making it seem like it was a grown-up thing, but I think she said something like she promised my dad she wouldn't say anything. I was nosy as duck as a kid/teen and always wanted to be in the know of what was happening with the adults. Well, after a few beers around the fire after my dad had gone to bed, maybe that night or the next, it finally comes out that my dad had woken up around 3 to 4 a.m., unable to move with their entire bedroom full of people surrounding the bed and just glaring down at my dad. He tried to wake my stepmom up or to call to her. But he was paralyzed, and when he closed his eyes and opened them again, they would still be there. Eventually, closing his eyes worked, and when he opened them again, they were gone, and he was finally able to wake my stepmom up to tell her what happened. When she tells us this, my cousin and I are freaking out because this house is already scary as duck, and we've all had weird experiences, but nothing that couldn't be rationalized up to that point. I've never known my dad to accept ghosts as anything more than the product of an overactive imagination or outright lies people tell for attention, so the fact that he was spooked enough to not want anyone else to know was jarring. I think they ended up looking into it and found that sleep paralysis was a pretty good explanation and left it at that, but a couple of days later it happened again. Same time, same people, same inability to move. I think this happened once or twice more before I half-jokingly/half seriously connected the dots and suggested my cousin and I go back down to the cemetery and apologize. I had it in my mind that maybe it was real and that these people were glaring at my dad for not handling his shitty kid and allowing us to disturb their final resting place. We went down that day and apologized, feeling dumb as duck for talking to air but also kind of relieved/hoping it would work. It's probably coincidental, but my dad never had another sleep paralysis episode after that, and he'd never had one before then, so it's enough to make me question things. Other weird things still happen in that house even now when I go to visit almost 15 years later, and almost everyone who's been in that house has seen or heard things themselves. My dad's gone from complete skeptic to it's a weird ducking house. I have one. Which event only happened in 2023. My experience, I live at the very top of Northern Ireland. I live in a beach town that's quite popular during the summer and warm weather. But this story takes place on the 3rd of January. The weather wasn't warm at all. As a result, the beaches were empty. And it was just after New Year's, so everyone was hungover. It was my mom's birthday, and every year on her birthday, we light a bonfire on one of the beaches. Usually it's me, my mom, my granddad, my dad, my uncle, and an old friend of mine. But this time my friend was sick, and so was my uncle. So there was only me, my mom, my dad, and my granddad. Now on to the actual story. My mom and dad had left to get some stuff from the shop. While my granddad looked after the fire, I was just walking down to the sea. While I was walking down, I saw a boy. Now this boy was 5 years old, he had short, curly blonde hair. He was wearing a light bulb knitted vest with a white polo underneath. And he had navy denim shorts. I never saw his shoes. I was confused when I saw him. There was no one else on this beach except me and my granddad. So I talked to the boy. I asked, "Hey, where are your parents?" He just replied back, "Over there to the complete opposite side." And I could see the other side, and no one was there. I was confused but just thought his family was in a car packing up. Before I could speak, my granddad shouted for me. I turned around straight away. But I quickly looked back at the boy. So I could tell him to go back to his family. But the second I turned back to the boy, he was gone. I frantically looked around the beach. He was nowhere. And this beach was a clear beach. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. A couple of months later I was thinking about it again. That's when I decided to ask my granddad if he saw me talking to anyone. She said he called me over because I was talking to myself. I still don't know what that was, but most likely it was a ghost. Creepy doll we couldn't get rid of. My daughter has a doll that was battery operated, would clap and sing when it heard a loud clap, and also had a motion sensor. The batteries died, so we put it on the shelf in the dining room. Days passed, and we never put in new batteries. The shelf is too high for the children to reach, and even if they could, they didn't know how to change the batteries. Anyways, in the middle of the day, no one is near the doll, it starts singing and clapping. Only for a few seconds. Weird, but it stopped. Then randomly at nighttime, you'd just doze off, and this would sing loudly and scare you awake, lol, but not funny. So I investigate the doll and get nothing. I clap loudly at it, and it doesn't activate. I wave my hands for the motion sensor, and nothing. I put it back on the shelf and walk back to my room. The damn thing goes off again. WTH? I took the doll, threw it in the outside trash bin, and went back to sleep. The next day the doll is on the couch in the living room. The kids are 3 years old and 4 years old. I know they couldn't have gotten the doll out of the big trash bin. There's no one else who could have gotten it. As I approach the doll, it starts singing and clapping again. I freak out and ask the kids anyways. They say no. So I turn on my fireplace and throw the doll in. Burn, witch. Then my daughter brings me a pink teddy bear, tells me he is not her friend anymore, and throws him into the fireplace too. The black smoke that rolled up the wall and into my house was crazy. Had to open the windows, lol. Evil doll gone, unfriendly pink teddy bear gone too. My daughter still talks about that doll to ask me why I burned it. I told her it was haunted. Thanks, bye. Telling this story makes me sound insane because it's a lot of, weird feelings and nothing actually happening. But here we go. Sleepover at a friend's house. We are all around 12 years old. There were 6 of us. The host has shared numerous stories about her house's eerie atmosphere, and she is confident that it is haunted. Things like whispering at night, stuff getting moved around, and things getting knocked to the floor. Creepy but has plausible deniability because she's 12, and there's also an older brother who has his friends over a lot. She also has a Ouija board she likes to mess around with. Had some creepy stories about it, too. We are all hyped to see some ghosts. We're taking turns, nothing crazy has happened. I haven't taken a turn yet because I've always felt sensitive to that type of stuff and was honestly scared. However, my close friend, E, wanted to try and talk to her dad, who had passed, so I agreed to do it with her. 2 other girls joined, the host, A, and a girl who had been rather emotional that night due to some family issues, K. We were asking a couple of things and getting one-word answers. I was having a hard time believing it wasn't A or K moving the planchette. E asks a serious question, "Are you actually my dad?" Or something along those lines. At the same time, all of us visibly stiffen, go silent, and take 5 or so seconds to pull our hands away from the board. I had felt a sharp pain travel up my spine and stop at my neck. In this brief moment of time, I felt like I had to mentally harden? I have no way to explain it other than that as I felt the pain travel, I had to brace my mind. We all look at each other wide-eyed, and Kay bursts into tears, shrieking that her leg was in pain. She runs outside, and the two who were not participating go to try to comfort her. E tells us that she felt a pain travel up her spine and stop in her arms, and they were still aching. According to A, she experienced pain that quickly subsided after moving up her spine and through her arms and legs. When Kay finally came back, she confirmed she felt a pain travel through her spine and down to her leg, and it still hurt. I tell them I had only felt the spine pain, but it did not hurt anymore. None of us really knew what to make of it. We were pretty freaked out. We were all on edge the rest of the night. Most of the girls kept trying, but I refused to touch the board again. Nothing happened with the board after this, but we all convinced ourselves we could see a face in the TV lamo. Pretty sure it was actually a weird reflection, but who's to say? But that is the one and only time I have used a Ouija board. The following is a true account of my experience attempting an all-night hike on November 18th. I am sharing this assuming somebody somewhere may have the experience or knowledge to explain away the events that I am about to describe and maybe provide some clarity regarding what animal I could be encountering. Once again, if anyone has an explanation for these events, please let me know. These are all real. 2 days ago I went to a state park a while north of me to attempt an all-night hiking adventure that I thought would be fun and maybe a little scary, but only scary enough to make a good story, you know? I thought the most I could expect was a fight with coyotes over my food, but I was sadly mistaken. Without boring you with details, I will immediately begin describing what happened. I got to East Fork State Park in Batavia around 7 p.m. Given the time of year, it was already dark. I myself am very aware of the effects that aesthetics can have on the body, so I began by picking a spot near the lake and cooking my food. I placed a T-bone steak onto my propane grill and began to cook it. However, after turning around to rummage through my pack for a second flashlight, my hand stumbled across something cold and hard. I picked it up, and to my utter confusion, it was the steak that I could have sworn I prepared already. I glanced down to see my propane grill operating, but it was empty. In the woods, one's senses are already slightly heightened, and situations that would normally not cause concern can become quite frightening. This occurrence immediately disconcerted me, as I do not take any medication or have any known mental illnesses. In an attempt to regain my comfort, I took the steak and once again placed it on the grill. I stared at it and watched it sizzle. I even waited until I could smell the steam before taking my eye off it. I then continued looking for my flashlight, and all was well for a few hours. By this event I had hiked maybe a mile. I was moving quite slow compared to normal, and the steak thing was still on my mind but not worrying. I came around a bend where the trees began to get more dense and sat lower when I saw a deer standing maybe 20 yards ahead, perfectly positioned, facing me on the trail. I was not worried by this yet, though, and actually reached for my phone to take a picture. I wanted to wait for the deer to turn its head, which I assumed it would, as deer eyes are placed on the sides of the head, before taking the photo. I stood there making eye contact with this buck for a solid 45 seconds before I began to question things. I finally took the photo and approached the deer to continue hiking. As I got closer, however, the deer remained unfazed. Baffled, I took my phone out once again and began recording. I approached the deer slowly and was able to get within 10 feet of it before I heard it exhale and it hopped off. I was extremely surprised by this behavior but not yet scared. I continued hiking, and by this point I had stopped thinking about the steak event. For about another hour I was granted a peaceful hike until I reached an area where the path came to a bald spot in the trees. Looking around was cut short, as the absolutely pungent stench of burning hair and rotting flesh was the only thing I could detect. The smell was so incredibly present that I immediately began to vomit. This is nothing strange because I am typically very sensitive to smells, and my stomach is easily upset. However, what was not normal was that I kept vomiting. I continued to vomit all over the ground, losing every single thing I had eaten. I heaved probably about 5 times before then dry heaving another 3. By this point I was lying on the ground in excruciating pain and crying. My vision was clouded by tears, but between my forceful blinks I could see my hands illuminated in a soft red glow, and when I stopped heaving, I looked up and saw the light over the trees with no source. Sort of like if someone was holding a really bright flashlight at you from meters away. I scrambled to my feet, and placed my hand in vomit accidentally, which is important later, and began running. I had no idea what was going on, but I assumed I was extremely ill. Between the hallucinations and vomiting, I was convinced I was poisoned or ate something I should not have at some point. I ripped out my flashlight and began walking. The way back was normal, and besides my horrible stomach ache, I was generally fine. However, upon crossing the base of the peninsula that I cooked on, I felt my flashlight get jerked out of my hand. I turned back unbothered, thinking the string had been caught on a stick, but I realized that I was in an area of strictly sand, with no vertical objects anywhere near. I turned back in the direction and continued. At this point I was no longer afraid. I was experiencing the same kind of fear that a child experiences when they first wake up from a bad dream, with a strange feeling lingering in the back of my throat. I managed to climb a steep hill and gazed back at the peninsula, a sight that continues to shake my mind to this day. I saw myself turned around, looking for my flashlight. Frozen with confusion and fear, I just watched. The other me searched frantically and eventually fell to his hands and knees searching. I then heard something, which I cannot express enough terror with words to convey the emotion I was feeling. I watched in the distance as I began to physically rip myself apart. I ripped off my own limbs and began to eat my fingers. I once again began to vomit, and the stench of burning hair once again returned. This time I was only puking bile and heaved twice before standing straight up again. Looking back at the peninsula, I saw nothing. The hallucination was gone, but the smell remained. I began running and found the trail again. I passed a camping shelter with 3 walls and a very slanted roof, which I did not remember from the journey before. However, the short bridge afterwards confirmed that I was on the right path. I began to run, guided only by spots of dim moonlight on the ground. I sprinted longer than I believe I ever have before and eventually made it to the exit, where I immediately threw my stuff into the passenger's seat and drove away. I still don't know how to point out what happened to me, and there are many feelings and details that I left out to keep this as short as I could while maintaining a degree of explanation. If anyone recognizes these as symptoms of an illness or a psychoactive drug, please let me know. If this is something else entirely, please tell me. I am begging for an explanation. I see my psychiatrist tomorrow and have already consulted my doctor. I appreciate anyone's considerations, and please try to provide me with an explanation of what the hell happened to me. Creepy house story. So, throughout my childhood, I would visit my grandma's house frequently. Sometimes it was just a visit, and others I would have a sleepover. As I got older, I became more and more scared of the house, where it would get to a point that I would have panic attacks even at the mention of it. As well as this, the activity increased as I got older. Eventually I refused to go anywhere near it. So, my first memory was that I used to get what I now think was sleep paralysis in the house / waking up not being able to move. In these moments I could hear loud voices, both male and female, repeating numbers or words, which would get increasingly louder and closer. This happened around the age of 4/6 and stopped at about 13. I started having recurring nightmares in the house. This would always be relatively the same dream and theme. It was pitch black, and I was standing in the house, and someone would appear out of nowhere and chase me, trying to hurt me. This only stopped within the last 2 years. It traumatized me that much. It would always feel cold and heavy in the house. I would feel cold air and see shadows out of the corner of my eye. At nighttime, when it was really quiet and I was lying in the dark, afraid to go to sleep, I could hear footsteps and mumbling and bangs downstairs or in the corridor. I would be shaking with anxiety. Objects would move on their own, and lights would flicker. I tried to search up the history of the house but got nothing. There was just always a heavy feeling. The house was always freezing cold, electricals would stop working frequently, and I'd always be tired. I was 17, and I and a group of friends were going camping to a spot not far from our town. Couldn't get into pubs. There were 6 of us walking down a very secluded country road with next to no street lights. We were all merry from the drink and smoke when my friend looked behind us and stopped. "There's a girl behind us." Automatically assuming he was trying to deaf us out, we laughed it off and ignored him. However, he didn't move, eyes still fixed over my shoulder. So, reluctantly not wanting to fall for a made-you look, I craftily looked over my shoulder. And there she was. I could see her as clearly as I see my phone in my hand now. A young girl no more than 10-11 years old in a white floral dress. Now first off, this is creepy as SHT anyway. We're at least a mile from the nearest house, let alone village. It's pitch black, but she's standing under a streetlight so visible, but her face was hidden by shadow. So, I am properly creeped. There's a young girl all by herself in the middle of nowhere just staring at a group of teenagers, and we're all drunk and smoking biffs. Now I don't believe in ghost stories and that rubbish, but we were creeped. It was me who broke the silence. I took a step forward and sort of went down to one knee. We're still about 20 meters from this child, and in my best reassuring voice, I shouted over to her, "You all right, sweetie?" The girl just stood there, not moving. My girlfriend at the time then stepped forward next to me and shouted over to the girl, "Are you by yourself? Where's your mummy?" Again no response. Then a younger one of our group, known for not being able to handle the smoke, had to speak up. "This is Defy, man, let's just bail, she doesn't want anything to do with us." After a small debate between the group, we decided to start walking and see if she'd follow. Now I know this probably wasn't the best choice, but at the time we just wanted out of the situation. We started walking, looking back to check, and the girl did not move. After about 20 paces, the girl looked up into the light, making her face fully visible. However, she showed no signs of fear or terror. No blood. There were no cuts or injuries. She was a perfectly healthy-looking child. She stared right through us as we carried on walking, and then she began skipping towards singing some sort of children's nursery rhyme. Writing this now, it still sends chills up my spine, and I'm going to be 24 soon. I wanted to just turn and run so bad, and since speaking to everyone there at the time now, they said they all did too. But not one of us did. We remained motionless, captivated by the young girl who was skipping towards us and singing. It wasn't a shrill singing or like that creepy echoey type thing you hear from children in horror films. She had a nice voice. For a child. Singing nursery rhymes. Then she stopped singing. Her skip suddenly turned into a full-on sprint, and she was coming right at us. We all just stared. She got to the closest streetlight to us, and I could see her in full under this one. Still in a full fierce sprint, my knuckles went white. I couldn't take my gaze off the girl. Then she was gone, just like that. As she hit the edge of the streetlight coverage, I just lost sight of her. She didn't poof away for anything, she just ran out of the light towards us and was gone. We all just let out a sigh and looked around at each other, not knowing what to say. It was weird, it was the most terrifying experience I've ever witnessed, yet as soon as she disappeared, I no longer feared for her safety, being a child, or my own. It did feel like a horror film. I felt almost humbled. My uncle's creepy encounter with the boy with the red face. Yesterday, I was talking with my dad on the way to work and asked him if he had any creepy stories that he had never told me. I am 16 years old, and I have always been interested in creepy, scary, paranormal things. I've become desensitized by a lot, but seeing my dad's face while telling this story gave me chills. My dad was 10 and had cousins who were just moving into a new house. While looking for a new house, his aunt and uncle noticed a very cheap, very nice place that they believed they could call home. When seeing the realtor, he explained to them that the reason this house is so cheap is that the previous owners had lost their son in a hit and run while the 2-year-old was playing outside. The son was unfortunately struck by the tire, and when the parents found him, his face was red with tire marks. The owners just wanted to get out of the house that reminded them of their late son and sold it to the first people that gave them an offer. There were 3 cousins, 2 older and 1 younger, Gary. Gary was 4 years old when they moved in, and to not scare the children away from this steal of a house, my dad's aunt and uncle didn't tell any of the kids about what the realtor told them. The house was beautiful and large, with there being a big backyard that was about 10 feet below the first floor due to the house being on a hill. A few nights went by, and Gary came into his parents' room at around 2 o'clock in the morning, complaining about a young child outside of his window. His parents were already weary of the situations, so imagine their reaction when Gary, who had no idea of the boy's fate, said that the boy in his window had a red face. Gary's window in his room is facing the backyard, which means that the boy he was seeing was 10 feet up. Like any parent would do, Gary decided to send the boy back to bed, even though I'm sure none of them slept much more after that. The next day went by as usual, but the next night, it happened again. At 2 a.m., Gary comes running in, complaining about the boy with the red face. Now, horrified by what their son is telling them, his parents sent him back to bed and called the previous owners of the house. They learned that Gary's room was the same as the previous owner's son's, and his ghost is trying to get in. Not knowing where else to turn, Gary's parents called a priest. The priest told them to pray to the child, as his ghost could just want someone to think of him. Indeed, after 2 days of prayer, the child's spirit finally found rest, and they experienced no further problems. It has been like that for as long as I can remember, but this story of the boy with the red face still haunts my dad any time he has to be reminded of it. I saw something as my mom. When I was 11 or 12 years old, I always woke up in the middle of the night for no reason. Sometimes my blanket is rolled up in a corner in my bed. So I sit up, untangle it, cover myself with it, and go back to sleep. So that night I sit up to find my blanket, but there was something in the doorway of my room. When I looked at it, it was my mom hunched over, then she smiled widely, and I don't know what the correct word for it is. She made a took 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 noise from her mouth by hitting her teeth together in a biting motion, and then she walked away. I got so scared, and I covered my head to toes in the blanket and eventually fell asleep. My mother is not the kind of person who does pranks. I've never in my life seen her try to prank anybody. That whole incident was long forgotten until recently. In the middle of the night, I woke up again for no reason. My fan was still on, so I got up, turned it off, and went back into bed. The moment I closed my eyes, I heard the took 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 sound right in my ear. I checked my whole room, and I was the only one in the room. With that, the old memories came back. I told the whole story to a friend, and we were talking about it when we heard the same took 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 noise from a corner. We both heard it and both stopped talking instantly. We again checked the room to find nothing but ourselves. It's a true story, by the way. One of the weirder experiences I have had happened many years ago, while I was a student at the university in Oslo, the capital of Norway. Most likely, this incident occurred in 2008 or 2009. I was friends with a fellow student at the time. We used to meet frequently, both at the university and back at the dormitories where we lived. We also went to the same fencing club together. One summer we used to meet a lot at the top of the tall dormitory building where he lived, which was located in Sogn student town. The building had a lot of floors. I seem to remember it had 10, so it was taller than most of the other dormitory houses sprawled around it. My friend lived on the top floor. There was a quite small balcony at one end of the top floor, where it was possible to get some fresh air. The floor itself was quite deserted the times I was there. I rarely saw anyone else, and we had the balcony for ourselves. We used to grill out there, drink wine and smoke a hookah he had, and in general had a great time together. One late evening I remember we got back into the shared student kitchen after having been sitting out on the balcony for quite some time. It was pitch black outside. At one end of the kitchen, there was a row of large windows, looking out into the dark night. I believe we may have been talking about mysterious topics, but I am not sure. We sat at a kitchen table by the row of windows, all alone, facing each other across the table. Outside the window, and fastened above it, there was hanging a power cable to the ground far below. Suddenly, I noticed in the corner of my eye that there was a dark figure hanging below the cable, crawling up it. My friend noticed it too, staring in fear and being so frightened that he fell off his chair. I instinctively pushed away from the window myself in the same instant. The vision lasted only a second or two. We both talked about it and found out that we had seen the same figure crawling up the cable. If any one of you has seen the movie Aliens, the sequel to the horror classic Alien, you might remember a scene where the characters are hiding in a kind of control room at the space colony. They are very anxious, as the electronic detectors indicate many aliens are closing in on them, but they cannot understand how. Then one of them opens one of the ceiling plates above them and looks inside. He sees the aliens hanging upside down and crawling forward inside this narrow space. The crawling movement of the figure I saw was exactly the same. At the time, I dismissed it as a shared illusion or hallucination. We were surely scared, but I left the place soon afterwards. I do remember me and my friend talking about the experience later, several times, but I did not attach any importance to it. It was merely a curiosity. However, many years later, in 2021 or 2022, I shared the experience with another friend. And he immediately said, "Check if somebody has fallen from the building." The thought had never entered my mind, but I promptly searched on Google for this. And, lo and behold, it came up right away. Several news articles came up, describing how one student had fallen out of a building at Sogn student town and died. It happened during a party. The police had researched it but found no evidence of anything criminal. This occurred in 2006, a few years prior. I immediately contacted the old student friend with whom I had seen the figure, sharing the news articles and asking about his opinion. And he said he knew of the case. It was a foreign exchange student from Russia who had fallen out of the same building he had lived in. My friend said he had fallen out from the floor below where we sat, if he remembered correctly. There had actually been rumors for a long time afterwards about sightings of his ghost in the area. What I initially thought was merely a mental illusion evolved into something far more unsettling after all these years. Was it really a ghost? I don't know, and I never will. I certainly had never heard about the death of the student at the time the experience occurred, so it cannot just be my mind imagining things based on my expectations of something paranormal occurring. If anyone has experienced something similar, please share. This experience has at least led me to consider other people's weird experiences with an open mind. Paranormal stuff is happening in my bedroom. My bedroom has always been creepy, feeling like I'm being watched, always super cold, weird noises at night. I'm pretty sure I've seen some weird shadows in the dark. One corner of the room is unexplainably creepy, animals stare at the corner, but lately things have gotten way weirder. My girlfriend and I decided to put a phone in the room for a few minutes while recording. We heard whispers clear as day, heard a chair move across the floor slightly. No one was in the room, we were in the other room. When we went back in the room, it smelled like someone had just blown out candles. We have these little tea light candles on our dresser but haven't lit them in months. But when we checked the candles, we swear one had a little melted wax in the middle and smelled like it had been lit. We also noticed these black smudges on the walls and ceiling that weren't there before. They smelled and felt like candle wax. We thought this could all be caused by a second-hand mirror I found on the side of the road years ago, but when we threw it away, it just got creepier in there. Naturally, this freaked us out. We have been sleeping in the living room since, as we are too scared to sleep in there now. We still have to go in that room to get our clothes for the day, though. My girlfriend always says she feels heavy, like someone is pushing on her chest. I always feel like I'm being watched. Anyway, so today we went into the bedroom to get some clothes, and we noticed all these scratches/carvings/writings on our wooden dresser. Most of them look like cat scratches, but we don't have a cat. But there was also one word written childlike in all caps, Myvi. We looked into what it could mean, and all we could find was that Myvi in Latin means my la vie. With all of this, we also found more candle wax smudges on the walls and ceiling, and one of our tea light candles from the dresser was on the floor on top of some dirty jeans, which made no sense at all. We both remember putting the candles on the dresser where they always are. Well, that's all I can think of. If anyone has any ideas about what we could be dealing with, please let me know. We don't want to live like this anymore. Could it be because it's an old 70s house? Am I haunted by something, not the house? Is it the land? All of the above? Creepy old lady. In my very first apartment, in the year 2000, I had just moved away from home and was living with my new husband. There was an elderly woman that lived in the same complex. From our patio, we could see her watering her flowers down to the left of us. After living there for about a year, we heard this huge commotion outside. There was a fire truck, sirens, and we could hear screaming. When we looked outside, we could see the fire department trying to break into the same unit the weird old lady lived in. She had called 911 and had barricaded herself inside the house. They informed her they could not leave until they cleared the apartment. We could hear her screaming, "No, I will not open it, leave now," over and over. Eventually, the office manager came down and said she would open it with a key because the firemen were starting to go at the front door with an axe to get inside. I can still see the leasing manager opening the door and running backward to let the firemen in quickly. Once they were in, they were able to clear the unit quickly. There was no fire. And the old woman refused to give an explanation as to why she called for help and then locked herself inside. So we kind of just shrugged it off. We only lived in this apartment for 2 years. In that time, we discovered that the flowers she lovingly cared for on her deck were indeed plastic. She had them in a pot with dirt and wrapped them around a fence, but when we noticed she had blooms in the middle of winter, I went and walked by her unit and noticed they had been glued in place there. They were faded, but she kept the dirt in the pot wet. When we finally decided to move, we had relatives in and out of the apartment helping load stuff up. My sil asked me who the old lady was outside. Thinking nothing of it, I said, "What old lady?" and went to take a look. The old woman from the other unit was standing out in the middle of the road. She was wearing nothing but a house dress, bare feet, and messy, unkempt hair. She had a blank stare. I tried not to make anything out of it. Mostly, I just tried to ignore her. People moved in and out of the complex every day, and she had never done this. She wanted to know where we were going and why. I kept my responses short and simple, but she looked concerned. Even worried. The last thing I remember is us packing up the last of our furniture just before dark, and she was still standing, alone, in the middle of the road, with that blank stare, watching the moving truck leave. Now, I'm not superstitious per se, but for whatever reason, the next few years of our lives were a downward spiral. Relatives dying, losing my job, things like that. Basically, the next 2 years in our next apartment sucked. We decided to move out. And moved into our third apartment. Here's where it gets weird. I'm out walking my dog, and way in the distance I see an old lady in a little house dress. She walks out of one of the units and slowly walks into the middle of the road. The whole time I could swear she sees me and is looking right at me. It actually gave me chills, but I told myself, this lady is far away, on the other side of the tennis courts. No way she can see me. But I was wrong. The fact that no one else was around on this lovely spring afternoon really freaked me out. I almost turned around and backtracked just to get away, but I told myself I was being paranoid, and again that there was no way this woman could be looking at me. So we got right up onto the lot and tried behaving as if there wasn't someone standing alone in the middle of the road and tried to walk around her. And she just starts talking. As we are trying to quickly walk away. She didn't even address us, just "That's your dog? I haven't seen you, where do you live?" So I figured this lady is nuts and off her meds. I just started walking faster. I figured maybe she didn't like dogs. I've had people complain they don't like animals, so I just shrugged it off and kept moving. I hear her still talking behind me, after we had walked well past her, something about dogs. I never got that image out of my head, and even weirder, we go to that park every day and never saw her or anyone matching that description again. Less than a year later, our dog died. He got sick around the time we saw this creepy old lady. I again lost my job, for different reasons, but the timing was the same, and we again had a death in the family. Now my question is this: is it possible to see an entity related to bad times coming? Or is the entity something that can cause a curse? I know it sounds ridiculous. It couldn't have been the same old lady. But I can't help but wonder. I suffer from sleep paralysis. It happened more often during high school, and the episodes mainly involved me being thrown off a cliff while somebody laughed. It got old pretty quick. But a couple of years ago at my old place, I downloaded the Necrophonic app on my phone and started messing with it. I shouldn't have done that. A week later I had a dream. This dream began with a woman riding me, but her skin quickly turned pale and began to decay rapidly. I pushed her off, and the previous scene of her riding me was playing on a projection behind her as I was surrounded by darkness. She started growling lowly as she walked toward me, and I stepped backward to get away from her. I could feel that anxious feeling that I was about to go full sleep paralysis mode, so I noped out of my dream. I've learned to wake myself up before that shit starts. It's a feeling of anxiety and panic that I need to stop before sleep paralysis sets in. So I basically lay in bed for 4 hours before I fell asleep again. In this dream I was in a very claustrophobic building. I opened the main door to a wide grassy field and a road at the end of it. I saw that same pale woman on the road staring at me, and that same panicky feeling came on strong. I woke myself up, and I could hear the woman scream as I regained my senses. Another week passes by, and I have a dream I was in an old antique shop with this round humanoid creature at the counter. The items in this place felt cursed. I took a brief look around before the shop owner caught my eye, and without hesitation, I said, "Don't go out there, she's waiting for you." I could see the pale woman outside of the glass doors. As I woke myself up this time, I felt my foot get dragged down the ducking bed and my face leave the pillow and hit the mattress. That's the end of it, though. Since I moved, I haven't experienced anything like it. When I was home alone on my days off, my roommate's dogs would come in to be near me when they got scared. I haven't ducked around with that app since. So it's an old story, but this happened to my younger cousin. I don't remember much from it, though, but still. When my cousin was young, around 12 to 13 years old, they liked playing stupid stuff even though it was really dangerous. So, one day they just randomly decided to play the spirit of the glass, calling out the soul of a disease and asking about them, etc., etc. From what I've heard and seen on the internet, playing this game is very dangerous, as it is associated with spirits. Also, it has some steps or processes that you should follow in order to finish the game as safely as possible. So here's the story. They are playing the spirit of the glass at the back of an old abandoned apartment. What she tells me is they had a different role playing that game, the one who'll light the candles, the one who'll ask the spirit and everyone, who shall participate holding the glass. They start with a very light question, like, "Are you dead?" Kind of a stupid question for a ghost to be honest, lol, "Are you a male or female?" Etc., etc. Then she told me they asked the ghost something more problematic, and the ghost's answer became scarier and scarier, which made them stop the game midway, which is not the right step. They threw the glass, it shattered, and they moved on from it. After a week or so, everything seems normal. This continued until one of her friends fell gravely ill. One got into a stair accident, the other became possessed, the other has some apparition in their house, like knives flying straight into their walls, and my cousin had an accident. To be honest, I also thought it was a dumb thing to believe in such, but her accident is kind of eerie. Before the accident, she often had nightmares about something. I don't know what, she just told me she has nightmares. She was hit by a motorcycle while walking on the street, she flew away because of the impact, but she doesn't remember any of it. Her parents just told her what happened, and fortunately it wasn't that bad, so she recovered quickly. Because of this incident, 2 of her friends changed houses, and they've lost contact ever since. Mind you, she doesn't believe in such things, and neither do her friends. They think it's just a stupid game and it won't hurt them. So yeah, don't do anything stupid at all. The wardrobe mirror that led to 5 years of horror. To set the scene, my family, originally from Hindu India, settled in the UK in the 1960s. Apart from my parents, Everyone else was born in the UK. Two things of note are: A. My granduncle was a Hindu exorcist. B. The Hindu religion, or Santana Dharma to give it its correct name, has an extensive belief structure based around the dark side, demons, monsters, witchcraft, etc. that is also affected by the local environment and folklore. As a family, we moved to a new house that was previously owned by an elderly lady. The lady was found dead in the home downstairs, apparently where she was sleeping. The only furniture that we kept was a beautiful wardrobe that had a long mirror on its door. It was situated in the master bedroom. Within 2 years, my father died. Apparently, a heart attack. He did have underlying illnesses. Then within 6 months, weird things begin to happen after my first nephew is born. My mother said she saw my father looking over his first grandchild early one morning. After that, she began to hear voices coming from the master bedroom calling her name at odd times when no one else was in the house. The family put it down to stress and grief. No more occurrences until my second nephew was born. His birth seemed to trigger a cascade of events. Initially it was voices that would moan in agony coming again from the wardrobe area of the bedroom. Subsequently, shadowy figures began to make their way up the stairs. My mother and sister-in-law were scared to tears when they heard screams and footsteps pounding all around them, yet no one else was in the house. Then the attention centered on my youngest nephew. He was 2 when it began. He would sit for hours talking to various presences in various rooms in full front view of the whole family. One evening everyone was in the living room just talking. The 2 boys were playing with their respective toys when suddenly the youngest stopped and shouted loudly, "No, no, 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 stay away, stay away, stay away." My brother had to hold him tight to stop him from having a fit. From then on, one adult would always be with him. Finally, one night my sister-in-law woke to hear her name being called. She looked to the wardrobe and found people on the other side looking into the room. Most of them were of Indian heritage. She thought she was dreaming, went back to sleep but awoke an hour later. Again the people were still there, but this time she saw one pushing its way through the mirror into the bedroom. This is when her screams woke everyone. The whole house lit up, and the family was staying at a cousin's place that night. The next day we brought in a Hindu priest who went around. He came back down, looking very unsettled. He told us that the old woman who owned the house was living downstairs because of the mirror. The mirror was the focal point of all the issues. The mirror served as a portal, drawing in all the members of our family who had died and not reincarnated due to their attachment to this material world. They were angry and hungry. They were looking for peace, so they decided to use this portal to attract the attention of the family to do the final rituals for them, hence, all the activity, attacks, etc. We asked what would happen if we just got rid of the wardrobe. His answer, now 30 years old, scares me to this day. It won't matter. They have gained a foothold in our world. The door has been opened. If you don't do the rituals in India, they will possess the youngest and then each one of you in turn. You will all die but not before you suffer mightily. My brother, sister-in-law, mother, and youngest nephew, the most affected, went to a special place in India and did the rituals over a day. The moment the final mantra was spoken, I and my eldest nephew heard the door of the wardrobe shut forcefully. Then, under the instructions of the priest, we took the wardrobe apart, taking care not to break the mirror, and then disposed of it. Today, 30 years later, my youngest nephew is 32 and hates all things spooky. My sister-in-law only uses small vanity mirrors, and I sometimes get sudden chills that alert me to never look at any mirrored surfaces within the location I am in. I did it once and scared myself so badly I did not leave my house for a week. It seems that the occult sensitivity that made my granduncle an exorcist jumps one generation, and now it is myself and 2 cousins who display, to varying degrees, sensitivity to the occult. I appreciate your patience in listening to this far. I have collected more anecdotes of the South Asian occult experience in the West, and India, and maybe I may relate some more here. In the meantime, please be incredibly careful what furniture you keep or old furniture you buy, and if you can, do buy brand new mirrors. The girl in the mirror. When I was a teenager, I loved staying up late during vacations, dancing in my room all night. In my room, there was a tall mirror that stood on the floor. As usual, I was dancing away one night when my gaze fell upon a new little digital camera. At that time, phones weren't as advanced as they are now, and the quality of photos wasn't great either. The camera was pink, and my sister had bought it. I don't know why, but in that moment, an idea came to me. I wanted to take a selfie, but one that would show my whole body. So, I placed the mirror on my bed so it was a bit higher and stood in front of it. I grabbed the camera, pointed it at the mirror, and clicked to take the photo. When I looked at the picture, I froze. For a moment, I was in complete shock. There I was, in the picture, but there was something else. I saw the flashlight in the mirror, and when I looked just near my head, I saw a girl. She was looking over my shoulder, staring at me through the mirror. She had a pale, almost white face, with long black hair and black eyes. It wasn't just a reflection or something weird in the lighting, it was her. She was in the photo with me, just as I was there too. I was so scared that I instantly deleted the picture, as if doing so would make her presence disappear. I ran out of my room and down to the living room. It was about 3 a.m., and everyone was asleep. I couldn't bring myself to wake anyone up. I had already deleted the photo, and I regretted it immediately because now I had no evidence to show when I would tell my story. I sat in the living room for about 20 minutes, trying to calm myself down, before finally heading back upstairs to my bed. I never saw that girl again, but there were moments after that when I felt a strange presence. The creepy part is that later, when I told my mom what had happened, she told me something unsettling. Apparently, the previous owner of the house had a daughter who had taken her own life. We had been living in that house for almost 3 years at that point. This all happened when I was 16 years old. Now I am 35, and still when I think about it, I get chills down my spine. When I was around 11, I lived in a house in a small town called Cushing, Texas. It was the middle of summertime, so extremely hot. I was lying on the couch one night, shirtless, trying to fall asleep when I felt this cold feeling pass through me. It wasn't like a gust of wind or air conditioning. It was like an internal coldness that went through what felt like my stomach and up past my head. That's just one experience in this house. When we first moved in, something didn't seem right. We had a shed in the backyard, and even further back was a horse stall looking structure, but you couldn't see it from the backyard. You had to walk past some bamboo behind our house to get it. And inside was what looked like an older hospital bed. Like not even electric. Like maybe the World War II era. My mother has always been very spiritual, should I say, and she felt things were off as well. She had a friend come over with a camera and take pictures around the house. Sadly, I was never able to get them from her due to moving shortly after. She put the camera up to the window towards the shed that you could see behind our house and took a picture. In it you could clearly see the reflection of an older gentleman who wore glasses and had a beard. Yet I was the only male in the house at the moment and don't wear glasses or have a beard. Our house also had that old weird wallpaper that you could move around with your hand as if it was loose. We took more pictures of the other rooms in the house. Above our doorway in the living room, you could clearly see the wallpaper, which made out the shape of a woman kneeling in prayer. There was what I could only describe as a clown face on the wall in my brother's room. It had a slim face with its mouth open and sharp teeth. It was kind of like a maniacal smiling face. My mother's friend had a team of paranormal investigators come out to the house after that. I was at a friend's house that night, so I didn't know what happened. When I got back the next day, I asked what they found, and she told me that there were black figures they found in the old horse stall, but she wouldn't tell me anything else when I persisted. She would get this stern look on her face and wouldn't say much else. To this day I don't know any more than that. That was the last experience I remember having with the paranormal, but definitely not my first. This happened a couple of years ago when I was backpacking in Australia. I traveled around driving a van, like many backpackers there do, as it saves a lot of money on accommodation. I usually slept in rest areas, gas stations, or wherever I could park. This one night, I'd been driving for a few hours and started to feel sleepy. I decided then to stop in the next rest area, in the middle of nowhere. Parking in that location during the daytime could be a great idea, but at night it seemed like a horror movie location. There were no cars parked there. I know, I should park where there were more people around, but I was really drowsy, and no lights whatsoever. I turned off the engine and closed the curtains of the van. It was not long before dawn that I heard some heavy knocking on the side of the van. Open up, it's the police. Nothing wakes you up faster than that. My heart was racing. I was just adjusting to the adrenaline rush in my system when they repeated the heavy knocking, saying it was the police. My first thought is that I parked somewhere I shouldn't, but then again, it was the middle of nowhere, and it was a rest area. I decide to go slowly to one of the windows and look through the gap in one of the curtains, with my mind telling me that the situation was weird as duck, before opening up. I could clearly see the shape/shadow of a guy standing beside the van. His car wasn't too far, but it didn't have any lights or flashing lights on. This person was definitely not a cop. Bringing up the courage I had left, I just shouted, "Get the duck away. I have a gun, and I'm calling the cops on the radio." I didn't have a radio or a gun, but that seemed to faze him. I saw him getting back in his car, and, to add to the creepiness, someone came out of the bushes and also got in the car. They left, and a few minutes after that, I turned on my van and drove in the opposite direction they went to. Safe to say that I never slept in another rest area that didn't have at least a couple of other cars parked. I don't know what those people wanted, but with Australia's history of backpacker serial killers, I'm very happy to be here today. I and my at the time boyfriend, now ex-husband, were sitting by his grandfather's grave with our pit bull type dog. It was very late at night, and we had just been on a walk. Unable to sleep, there was a little path that led to some closed and locked big gates. We heard a noise like banging and clanging. I looked over and saw a man in a long coat just standing facing the gates, holding onto them and pulling them back and forth, rattling them very loudly. He then stops and walks up the little path towards us. As he gets closer, I see he is wearing a trench coat and looks old-fashioned, and he's old but looks off-color with bags under his eyes, as if someone had pushed a finger under each eye and left an indent. Not that that's important, I just remember it vividly. Anyhow, as he approaches, our dog starts going mental, snarling, growling, and jumping towards him. My BF has him by the lead and is using all his strength to restrain him. The man eventually gets right to us. The dog is still going nuts. When he gets to us, he stops and turns to face us. I remain silent, feeling increasingly uneasy. He was just facing us and not saying a word. He was expressionless, and his pose never changed, even with the dog snarling and lunging for him. My boyfriend then remarked, "I apologize, my friend, he is not usually like this, he will not harm you." I don't think this was true. Our dog wanted to rip this man's face off, and I have zero doubt about it. Also note that this man looks like a solid human. I have had a lot of experiences, and this is the only one like this. After what feels like an uncomfortably long time, my boyfriend and I look at each other like, WTF? The man then turns and walks away without uttering a single word. He carries on walking up the trail, and I peer round to see where he was going. He was gone, nobody was there at all, and this isn't possible. It was only 2 seconds, and there's nowhere else he could have gone. I look at my BF, and he just says, "Run." Already on edge, I bolt as fast as I can. As he rushes forward, this man yells, "Avoid turning around or looking behind you. Whatever you do." I'm absolutely terrified. Please inquire about what happened when we return. He told me he knew when I looked over that that man was gone, and something in his head told him to get out and run. Fair enough, so I said, "Why tell me not to look behind me?" And he said, "Because as we ran out, through a little cutoff bit, not the main entrance." The man couldn't have left through this as it was behind us. He looked behind him towards me to check I'm running, and he saw a solid shadow figure step out from a bush towards me and look like it was coming towards me. He was scared it might follow us back, and if I had seen it too, he couldn't tell himself, he could have just spooked himself. Wish I hadn't asked, TBF. I didn't sleep that night and have never gone on any nighttime walks to the graveyard again. This was about 12 years ago. I've also avoided it as best I can. It always makes me feel uneasy whenever I have to pass it. Creepy experiences as a child. As a child, I had many paranormal experiences. From ages 8 to 17, I had some pretty strange things happen to me. I lived in a pretty abusive home, and I believe that negative spirits are drawn to negative things, and that is why I had so many experiences when I was younger. I know that's not always the case, but I do believe that can definitely conjure something. I haven't had any creepy experiences in a few years, thankfully. My first experience that I recall was when I was about 8 or 9. I was at my grandmother's house. She was sleeping in her room, and I all of a sudden heard a scream, so I jumped up and ran to my grandmother's room to see if she's okay. She was passed out, not bothered at all. I had thought I imagined it, so I lay there all night. I didn't sleep until the sun was up and my grandmother was up. So, a lot has happened at my grandmother's house alone. I think it is her husband. He is a horrible person, and I wouldn't be surprised if he attracted all of the evil things in that house. Anyway, one of my childhood best friends visited my grandparents' house. We were outside at around 3 p.m. when she abruptly stopped and said, "Look into that window." I looked, and there was a short old woman with dark curly hair standing in my grandmother's bedroom window. We panicked and called Dad to pick us up because I thought it was my grandma, but she has blonde hair and isn't short. She never returned. She would refuse to go there with me even if I begged. This was the last time I entered her house. I will never go back there. I was up late watching TV in the living room, drinking some tea, and I saw a shadow in the hallway. I thought it was my eyes playing tricks on me, but then I saw a full-on black shadow standing in the hallway. There was no way that it wasn't real. I screamed, and my grandmother came running out, and I told her what happened. She didn't believe me, so I just stayed up until my parents came to get me. I have also had experiences in my childhood home. One instance is I was watching TV with my mom in her room, and we heard what sounded like glass being knocked over, so we went downstairs, and the vase on the coffee table was knocked over. We were so confused, there was literally nobody or anything that could knock it over. In my childhood home, I used to get sick all the time with the flu and strep. I missed so much school because of it. I always wondered if the spirit that was there was the reason I was always sick. I was the only one to ever get sick, nobody else would. Once I moved out, I rarely ever got sick. Another instance was when I was about 12. Our air conditioning broke, so we all just ended up sleeping downstairs since it was 100 degrees up there. You could see the basement from the living room, so since we were sleeping in the living room, I would hear whistling coming from the basement, and I would hear what sounded like someone snapping their fingers, and I would hear scratching. That always terrified me. I never went down there. And in the basement there is a random crucifix nailed to the ceiling. My dad tried taking it down, but I told him to keep it up just in case, so he did. My best friend stayed one night. It was just me, her, and my sister since both of my parents were at work, and she kept saying that she was seeing things such as little blue dots, which I would think would be orbs, which confused me because I thought you could only see orbs in photos. As the night went on, she would say that she saw a shadow figure out of the corner of her eye, which I was seeing but didn't want to frighten her even more. She eventually said that she wanted to go home, so I told her that I and my sister would walk her home. She lived down the street. As we were about to leave, we heard a loud bang. It sounded like a dresser had fallen. We didn't even take a chance. We bolted to her house, and my sister and I stayed the rest of the night. We didn't sleep one bit that night. In this house, a light from the bathroom at the top of the stairs lit the stairway. You would see shadows walking past when nobody else was there. It was really scary. It constantly happened. There was a lot of activity on the stairs too, which is a weird place for there to be activity. On the steps, you could hear people walking. Both of my parents have said the same thing. My dad thinks it was a child. He would hear what sounded like a child laughing and running up the steps. Considering my increased knowledge of paranormal phenomena, could it have been an evil entity pretending to be a child? My little sister had seen a black shadow with red eyes standing over my mother as she was sleeping, which is pretty creepy. I didn't believe her at first because that really scared me, but one night I couldn't sleep. I went to go see if my mom was still up. When I walked in, I saw a black figure standing over her, but it didn't have red eyes, it was just a black figure, and it disappeared within seconds. That was hands down the scariest thing that has happened to me. My little sister had an old porcelain doll that was named Sally. Unsurprisingly, this doll consistently evoked a sense of unease within me. My sister carried it around everywhere. One day it had gone missing, so she had asked me to help her look for it. As I walked around the house, I noticed a doll's brown hair hanging over the cupboards in the kitchen. I asked her how she got it all the way up there. She replied that she hadn't put it there and had no idea how the doll ended up on top of the cupboards. This is the reason I hate dolls. Random items would disappear and then turn up in unexpected places. I had an iPod, which I remember placing on a charger to use the following day. However, when I woke up, it was gone. I locked my room, making it impossible for my sister to steal it. Later, I found it in a storage box while sorting items for donation. There were countless other things that would be moved, the occasional keys being moved, wallets being put in different areas, normal stuff like that. Anyway, there were my childhood experiences. Feel free to put your experiences if you'd like. In the early 2000s, when I was 6 and lived in a small town called Walla Walla. The vast majority of homes in my area date back to the late 1800s. We only rented the house for a year, but weird things happen a lot in it. I witnessed someone enter a different room, yet as soon as I rounded the corner, I found myself alone. Occasionally I heard someone call my name, but everyone would be out in the yard, completely fixated on something else. In my older brother's room, he said he could hear a dog growling from his closet even though no one near us had a dog. I'm a skeptic, so I usually explain those things away, except for one instance that, to this day, I and my older brother, who was 12 at the time, couldn't explain. My little brother had just been born 10 months prior, and my parents were completely okay with me and my older brother watching him while they made one quick trip to the store. Since it was such a small town, we lived only a couple of buildings away from the nearest grocery store, and the store was as big as a Walgreens. We were also close with our neighbors, so we had people to turn to in a crisis. As far as my parents were concerned, we would be okay for 20 minutes. My parents instructed us to stay together, never separate, and not open the door unless we heard a secret knock. With this, we felt confident we would be alright. I, my elder brother, and my fat little baby brother all sat on the couch in that order watching cartoons. I looked over at my little brother every now and then to make sure he was content. He had his pacifier and favorite bear in hand. I looked back at the TV and, within a few minutes, at my little brother. He was staring into my parents' bedroom. The lights were off, and all you could see was the silhouette of my parents' bed from the streetlights shining through the window. The window was the only thing illuminated inside the room, everything else was pitch black. The house is small, so my parents' room was adjacent to the living room, where their door was only 30 feet away from us. His eyes were locked onto my parents' room, which sent a panic through me. I alerted my older brother, who gently shook him to get him to stop staring, but he refused to look away. Then he finally moved his head as if he was watching something moving to the other side of my parents' bedroom. He watched whatever was in that room, moving his head back and forth slowly. It appeared as though there was a presence pacing within the room. I kept telling my little brother to stop because the noise was freaking me out. He just couldn't stop watching whatever was moving in my parents' room. He finally stopped moving his head back and forth. His head started to slowly move up towards the wall and then gradually towards the ceiling as if something started crawling up the wall. He continued to look upwards until he was staring directly above us. My parents secretly knocked on the door, and my brother swiftly unlocked it, prompting me to run to them, sobbing over what had happened. My confused parents turned on all the lights and found nothing. We scared our parents so much that we all slept in the living room together for a full week. When I lived in Montana, I used to like to go backpacking on the weekends. I'd usually find an alpine lake to hike to far away from any trails and plot a course along a river or stream, spend the night there, then climb the closest peak in the morning. However, I was smart about it. I'd always tell my friends where I went and when to expect me home. Except the first time. The first time I went backpacking and did an overnight by myself in the mountains, I climbed up the trail that was quite literally right behind my house. It was spring at the time, so there was still snow on top of the mountains. Now, this area of Montana had no cell service. My neighbors had a cell repeater that ran the cell service over the internet or something, but once you were a few hundred yards away from the house, there was nothing. So I hiked about 11 miles up the steepest, most arduous trail you could think of. I wanted to make it to Tabletop Mountain because, in my naivete, I thought, yeah, I want to camp on top of that. I get to the ridgeline of the mountains, and at this point, I'm exhausted. I'm using subpar equipment and a really shitty old external frame backpack that puts the weight nowhere near my hips. Not to mention that I had only started in the early afternoon and had essentially jogged up the first mile or two of the trail. The wind was so strong that I couldn't see the mountain top from 400 meters away due to the blowing snow. Knowing that I couldn't hike down at that point, it was getting dark, I decided to set up camp. Unfortunately, I'm standing on the ridge of a mountain. I can't camp on top because it's way too windy, and obviously there's nowhere to camp on the side because it's a ducking mountain, and it's really steep on both sides. So I found a little nook in the side of the mountain and dug in a flat spot into the snow and set up my tent there. Luckily, that seemed to work well enough. The tent was set up fine, and I got everything ready for bed. Being as cold as it was, I decided I wanted to start a fire. It was then that I learned that the fancy waterproof phosphorus matches I bought don't ducking burn at 10,000 feet. They just smolder, and I didn't have a camp stove at that point. With no way to start a fire, the sun going down and the wind picking up, I just decided to call it a night and try to get some sleep. Somehow, I fell asleep. I attribute it to the white noise effect of the wind on my tent. Now here comes the creepy part. I wake up in the middle of the night, and it's dead. Silent. No sound at all. Now, I'm not talking about the quiet you get in your bedroom at 3 a.m. I'm talking I literally cannot hear anything other than my own heartbeat. I was holding my breath. No wind, no trees rustling, no tent flapping, no snow blowing against the side of my tent. Literally nothing. At that point I was at least 7 miles as the crow flies from any human, any road, any speck of civilization. Now, you may not think that hearing nothing in nature is scary, but if you've ever been in nature, you know that the forest has a soundtrack. You hear the birds singing, the wind blowing, the river running, and the trees swaying and creaking. So to hear nothing is odd. Very creepy in itself. Kinda like the something bad is about to happen creepy feeling that you get. Except I had no escape. Where could I go other than my tent? One wrong step outside and I fall down the mountainside. Moreover, I found myself in complete solitude. No one was coming to save me. No one knew where I was. As if nature was inside my head and listening, it finally gave me something to listen to. Footsteps. The unmistakable, undeniable sound of feet on snow. Somewhere, outside my tent, within earshot of me. Crunch. 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 A million things raced through my mind. The first was, why am I awake now? Followed by, my body must have woken me for a good reason. And did I just imagine that? And what the hell would be walking around up here? Again, as if someone was listening to my inner dialogue. Crunch. I froze. I didn't know what to do. They were so clear. Were they 10 feet away? 5 feet? What were they? WHO were they? I didn't know what to do. I was paralyzed with fear. I listened to the footsteps for 30 seconds, taking a few steps. Then pausing. Then a few more. Finally, I couldn't take it. I had to do something. But I couldn't rightly get out of my tent without making noise. Zippers produce a lot of noise, particularly during quiet moments. The silence seemed to magnify any sound I made. So I did the only thing I could. I screamed as loud as I could. My heart was racing, the hair on my neck was raised, my knife in one hand and flashlight in the other, waiting for my unknown adversary's move. My ears were straining to hear anything over the sound of my quickened breath and my heart pounding in my head. But there was nothing. Nothing at all. I begged to hear something. I yearned to hear footsteps as they fled. I pleaded with nature to give me some sort of sign I was safe. But there was nothing. It was silent once more. It took me a good hour of reading to calm down after that. Thankfully, and this is weird to say on top of a mountain, the wind picked back up, and I couldn't hear anything once again and fell into a very shallow sleep until the morning. When I woke up, I looked for footsteps, but the wind had blown them away. 20 minutes after the sun was up, I was packed and headed back down the mountain. I never camped again without telling someone where I was. Now, I know lots of you will think I made this up. But you're wrong. I was driving through northern Nevada alone and decided to pull over and get a motel room. Driving at night in that region can be dangerous. I initially went to a one-story motel that looked sketchy. I remember slowly going through the parking lot there and thinking, if I'm fast asleep and someone wants to break into my room, there's nothing I can do. So I found a bigger, better-looking, multi-story hotel and went there. The desk clerk was so sweet and listened to my request for a third or fourth story room. I figured it would be quieter. I probably looked really bedraggled, driving all day. I got off on the wrong floor and figured there were other elevators to go to on the end of the building. I headed to one and stood by it while a full car was descending. The doors opened, and I saw a misty apparition vaporize in the empty spot in the elevator car. There were 2 men on the car. The men didn't notice anything unusual, even though I appeared to be staring at the spot I wanted to stand in. The men walked off the car. I remember the taller guy had longish hair and a puffer vest over his flannel shirt, and I got on alone. What I saw didn't frighten me. I've seen similar things before. Thankfully I slept well, and my trip went fine with no more paranormal events. I wonder if what I saw had to do with the taller guy. Who knows? I'll give you 2 stories. I moved around a lot as a kid. We were the kind of family that always had unopened and undisturbed boxes between moves. My dad was a good guy but had issues with authority, so he usually had issues keeping a stable job for more than a year or so. When the lease was up, we'd move closer to his new job. Anyway, during one of these moves, my dad discovered a hidden gem close to his workplace. It was an old 2-bed, 1-bath house with a detached garage. I want to say it was around $300 a month for rent. In 2003, apparently, it was in a rough part of town. The landlord told us, I won't go into the specifics, but I am required to tell you that someone has passed away in the house within the last 5 years. My dad saw a fantastic deal and shrugged it off. We moved in soon after, and things started very quickly. We constantly heard noises in the house. It felt as if other people were living there with us. Generally, the noises would be expected when there were other people around. These noises could include things like drawers opening and closing, doors swinging around on their own, or the water in the bathroom turning on and then off. Nothing malicious was happening, so we just lived with it. Another weird quirk about the house was that the front door had a keyhole on both sides. So you could not leave the locked house unless you had the keys. We lost the keys about a week after moving in, as you might expect. The house was still cluttered with boxes, and we were overwhelmed by the unpacking process. So my dad, obviously stressed from the whole situation, started getting loud about the keys. He accused me of stealing them. He was cursing and being a general pain. Then out of nowhere, we hear the keys hit the floor in the living room right in front of the couch, right onto the floor. He picks them up, tries to rationalize what just happened, says F it, and leaves the house for work. Over the coming months, the stupid keys are the center of the activity. My dad would put them in a glass bowl on top of our tube TV every day after work, and somehow they would be moved by the morning. My favorite spot by far was when we found them in a sealed box of pots and pans that we needed to unpack. It had little handle holes on the box's side, and it looked like someone shoved them in out of spite. We all got a good laugh out of that one. Right now, you're probably like, okay, what's spine chilling about some noises and some keys moving around? Let me explain why it's spine chilling. The worst thing that happened fairly frequently was the stomping. Most nights around 2 to 3 a.m., there would be very heavy footsteps pacing in the hallway outside of our bedrooms. I confirmed with my dad when I was older that, yes, it kind of freaked him out too. We had been living in this place for about 8 months at this point, and I was probably around 8 years old. I heard the stomping one night, and I just couldn't take it. I screamed out into the hallway, "Stop stomping around. I need sleep, goddamn it." 15 seconds of silence was abruptly interrupted by what sounded like a bull running full speed to my room. Then my door had 3 very aggressive slamming knocks one after another. It was so loud my dad woke up and came to check on me. My stomach started to turn, and I suddenly felt like I had to use the toilet. My dad's call to me froze me in bed. "Are you okay, buddy?" From his bedroom. I mustered up the courage to head out to the hallway. As I got up, I could tell something wasn't right. I was shaking like a leaf, and my bowels were trying to evacuate while I was walking. I ran as fast as I could to the toilet, but it did not help. There was a trail from about halfway between my bedroom and the toilet. And my poor dad, worried about my safety, followed me into the bathroom to figure out what the hell just happened. I explained everything, crying on the toilet, making a mess of myself and the house. I was embarrassed and terrified. After this, my dad told me, "If you ever feel uncomfortable, you can come sleep in my room. Nothing can bug you when I'm around." The final straw came a week later. My dad had been dating a girl for over a year, and she had been staying with us more and more. One of the nights she stayed over, they had a really minor fight right before bed. I think it was about cleaning/chores. Anyways, they both went to bed grumpy about it. Right around that magic 2 to 3 a.m. mark, his girlfriend got yanked out of bed by one of her ankles and got dragged out of the bedroom and down the hallway. By her account, she woke up after she was on the floor and felt someone pulling on her leg, and it took her a while to realize exactly what was happening. She shrieked, and whatever it was, let go. She ran back into the bedroom, turned on the lights, and explained everything to my dad. He sent me off to an aunt's house and stayed in the house alone for a few months while looking for another place to go. I believed it would be more secure without my presence. During the packing and moving out of the house, my dad had some friends swing by to keep him company while he packed. Almost everyone who came by to help mentioned that they saw a small white dog walking around right when they entered the house. Indeed, the place had a haunting presence. I still think about it from time to time. I wonder if the people who live there now deal with the same stuff, or if it's all calmed down. The time my drunk cousin faced the devil. There's a small town called Taylorsville in NC, and there's this long, straight dead-end road that my grandma lived on. If going towards the dead end. Again, this road was dark at night because there's no street lights, and on the right side is nothing but a cow pasture. Most of everybody lived near the top or beginning of the road, so that's where everyone usually hung out. Well, my cousin David was a drunk like everybody his age, 57. I think I was about 18 at the time. Well, after everybody started to leave, he decided he needed to get home himself, but he had to walk that dark road home, which he did often. Well, this particular night, as he was walking and stumbling since he's super blitzed, he heard something that sounded like a horse's footsteps slowly walking up behind him. He, being too scared to turn around to look, froze in place. He said that once he heard it get, like, right behind him, it stopped. He said the breathing of whatever was behind him sounded like a horse's breathing as well, and he felt the breathing on the back of his neck. He said he figured it was somebody's horse that must have gotten loose because some people on that road own horses. He said he was about to turn around to take the horse back to where it belonged, but the breathing got deeper and deeper, and then it sounded like a super deep person's breathing, and then a voice spoke and said, "You're coming with me tonight." He said he knew it was evil because once the breathing started changing, the hairs on the back of his neck began to stand. He said he couldn't run or anything. He was frozen, and he said as soon as a hand grabbed his shoulder, he could see the hand of a man, but it was hairy, the skin was a dark red, and the nails were long and black. He said that's when he started praying and saying, "Please, God, help me," over and over again. He said the hand moved away, and then he heard once again a horse's footsteps going back into the woods. He then departed, remaining fully sober throughout his journey home. He actually called someone who was around us when he made it home and told us. Of course people laughed and thought he was joking. But he wasn't laughing. I was 6 years old when we moved from the country to a big city in South Australia. As a 6-year-old, I was already used to moving and never really felt like any place was home. You see, we had been moving from place to place in attempts to flee from my biological father, who, let's just say, was not a good person. All I knew about it at the time was that he was a bad man and that I needed to protect my mum, but she did all the protecting, of course. However, this time it would be different. This was the first time I would live in a house that we could call ours, and a house we could stay in for a long time due to the fact that the reason for our moving was now coming to an end. This was a government-provided house that had only ever had one other renter and was fairly new, with a large backyard and plenty of space for a young boy to play without driving my mom crazy. I'll share the layout of the house, as it may help visualize future events. The house was laid out as an upside-down L shape, with the entry door at the bottom, leading into a large living room, which continued into a large kitchen. From the kitchen, you would go into an upside-down L-shaped hallway. On the left side of the hallway was the bathroom and laundry, with the toilet at the corner of the L. To the right, the hallway continued down to 3 rooms, 2 small ones on the left and 1 master bedroom at the very end of the hallway. So if you stood at the entry of the hallway, you would have no visual of the hallway leading to the rooms, only the doors leading to the bathroom, laundry, and toilet. Now the right side of the house was all windows that followed the L shape all around. The windows looked out into our fenced-off courtyard that wrapped around the house to a massive backyard. The first day we moved in, I was so excited. I got to pick which room I wanted. I chose the one closest to the bathroom, and we also went bed shopping. I believe it was the first bed I had, apart from a baby cot. I chose a bunk bed that had only the top bunk with shelves at the bottom. I loved it. My mom made sure to wrap the railings with doona covers so I had no chance of falling off in the middle of the night, which I thought was silly, as I was obviously a big boy and wouldn't be so silly as to fall. I came to really appreciate that barrier in the coming days and years, however. The first night I slept like a baby, no issues and no unusual things happened. I was so happy I had my room and my bed that I just felt content. On the second night, the first incident occurred. Before I continue, a bit of backstory that I was very much unaware of at the time. However, my mom was. Just 2 weeks prior to us moving in, there was a death on the property. A man in his mid-30s was stabbed and ended in the hallway right on the corner as it turns into the bedroom hallway. As it was told to me many years later, this man was an abusive boyfriend of a single mother. During his last session of yelling and hitting the mother, her son, who was 8 years old, heard his mother's cries of pain as she was beaten and decided he had to protect her. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen, walked into the hallway, and pushed it into the boyfriend's back. The paramedics declared the boyfriend dead, indicating that he had struck something crucial. Due to the trauma, the government moved them to a more supportive place and cleaned the house for the next person. Now back to the second night. I awoke suddenly, not knowing why, but I figured my mom had just been checking on me, as I felt someone was at the entrance of the room. I pulled myself up with the railings and popped my head over to look down into my room. What I saw would change me forever and form a memory I would never forget. I'm currently in my mid-30s, and I still can see it in my mind as if it were only yesterday. There, entering my room, was a man. But he also wasn't real. I say that because I could see right through him. I felt my body go cold and clammy. I was terrified but also not believing what I was seeing. I quickly sunk back into my bed and hid behind the doona cover barrier my mom had made me. I began pinching myself to wake up, scratching and punching, but I was still here. I had to have been mistaken. I was definitely awake, but I must have misunderstood what I saw. I pulled myself up with the railing one more time and slowly peeked my head over. He was still there. This time, he was looking up at me. That moment felt like an eternity. I took in everything about this man, his clothes, his hair, and his movements. It was insane. I was going insane. He wore a puffy Letterman jacket that I had only ever seen on old TV shows like Happy Days, jeans, and sneakers, which had a logo I could not make out. His hair was short but wavy, as if he was picking up a breeze. His face was not old but not young, younger than my mom, I thought. What made me know he was not a real man was something I've not seen in any ghost video, movie, or publication to this day. He was 100% transparent, but every crease, every detail, and every feature was outlined and highlighted in a luminous green. It's hard to explain, but maybe try to think of the stencil of a person. Only the lines are visible, but all in between is transparent. The detail was so vivid, I could see the pupils of his eyes staring back at me, yet I could also see right through them. Once I was no longer frozen in fear, I quickly sunk back down and hid again. I began to punch and pinch myself repeatedly as tears streamed down my face. This cycle went on for what felt like 20 minutes. Once I had stopped crying, I once again lifted myself up and peeked over the railing. It did not last long, as I could see, plain as day, he was still there. This time I went deeper into my room and looked around the back corner for some reason. This was the final time I looked. I ended up pinching and punching and crying myself to sleep. The following morning when I went out for breakfast, I told my mom everything. She showed no signs of fear. She told me not to worry and that it was just a reflection through the windows from the road. And of course, my 6-year-old brain somehow believed this. Somehow a reflection through a wooden fence, across a 7-meter courtyard, through closed curtains, and into my room seemed totally viable. Sometimes, I believe my brain simply absorbed a coping mechanism. But that was the first and last time I saw the man. However, it would not be the last time he would show us he is still around, or the only entity that would show itself to us. Around 1 month after the first incident, my mom was hanging clothes up on the line outside in the backyard while I played with my action figures in the dirt. I realized that I needed my big spider toy to keep my action figure scene going. Gambit and Rogue had just fought off a robot T-Rex and now had to fight off a giant spider. So I asked my mom if she had seen my spider, and she said it should be in my room, probably in my toy box. At this point in time, I had pushed the first incident out of my mind and was living a carefree, blissful life as a kid. But that day would be a reminder that things were not right in that house. I got up out of the dirt and brushed myself off best I could, as Mum didn't like to get dirt in the house. I then went in through the laundry back door, past the toilet, and entered the hallway. But that's as far as I got. I didn't know what had happened to me at the time, as I had never felt anything like it. My later teenage years would make me acquainted with the feeling quite well, as I had been punched in the gut. The force took any air I had out of me, and I fell to my knees and immediately started vomiting. I was in a lot of pain, but I was vomiting my breakfast, and as a kid, that was the most traumatic. I naturally started crying and calling for my mom, who came running inside. She picked me up and took me to the bathroom to clean up while asking what happened. I told her I didn't know, my tummy just hurt, and then I was vomiting. She looked concerned, but after about 5 minutes of monitoring me, I seemed to bounce back as if nothing had happened. All I wanted to do was get my spider and continue playing to cheer myself up. So that's just what I did. My mom cleaned up the vomit as I played in the dirt once more, just hungrier than the last time I was there. Until I felt the sensation later in life, I had no idea what had happened to me that day. I mistakenly believed that sudden stomach pain and vomiting were normal. How a child's mind justifies things will always amaze me. Over the next few years, we started to have weird stuff happen more and more. Very cliché things now, I think back. Taps would turn on without anyone near, doors would slam shut and open randomly, and knocks would be heard coming from unoccupied parts of the house. My mom thought it was me for a long time until she watched the tap in the bathroom slowly turn on in front of her. She would even tell my grandma about all the strange stuff after this. My grandma didn't believe her, of course, until she also had a similar tap turning experience herself. She even told me in my adult years of an experience she had, which I'll touch on briefly as it is still an occurrence in that house. My great-grandmother had died recently. She had very bad arthritis in her hands that gave her a very distinct touch, and I had bad asthma. Both are important to this brief edition. One night my mom was awoken by a hand pulling her wrist up and out of bed. In her groggy state, she felt her grandmother's hands. Without questioning it at all, she knew the touch and feeling of her hands. Upon waking up completely, she was filled with a chill and fear about what had just happened. She had exerted enough pressure to the point where she was halfway out of bed and on the floor. Pulling herself together, she got up and went to the bathroom to check on me. As she passed my room, she noticed something was off right away, as if by instinct, as she could not see me due to the barrier created by my bunk bed Duna. She rushed to me and climbed up the bed to see that I was, in fact, not okay. I had stopped breathing. I had had an asthma attack and had not been able to catch my breath. She immediately assisted me with chest compressions and mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Thankfully, as you can tell, I survived. But that's a story my mom has shared a few times about how my great-grandmother saved my life. Let's continue. Now, none of the little things really bothered me, as I was a kid off in my own little world. As kids should be. But not long after, I would once again be pulled into a nighttime terror that would affect me deeply. This time, I was not alone. It was about 4 years into living in that house. We had gotten used to the odd things, and they didn't really bother us anymore. But this night was different. This night would yet again be a night I would never forget, as it was a moment of pure fear for the safety of my mom. I was awoken by a blood-curdling scream, a scream of pure fear that I've not heard since. It was my mom. She was screaming as if being murdered. I was frozen in fear, I felt helpless and alone. The sound of the person who protected me and loved me was screaming in fear, and I could not move. As suddenly as she started, she stopped, and then there was silence. Somehow the silence was worse. It was unknown, a fear of whether my mom was dead or alive. What had caused her scream? What would I do now? I mustered up all the courage I could, and with a very weak voice, I said, "Mom?" She replied back, "I'm okay." Relief washed over me, but the terror remained. What had happened? That scream was not a scream that anyone would be able to fake, it was pure and guttural. My mom came to my room and reassured me everything was okay, that I should go back to sleep, and she would talk to me in the morning. I found it very hard to return to sleep, and I think she was the same. In the morning she told me what had happened over breakfast. As a now 10-year-old, it was probably still not the best idea to share, but she did as promised. She had woken up suddenly just as I had all those years ago. Looking around to see what had woken her, she saw a man standing at the foot of her bed just staring at her. This is when she screamed with fear, as I'm sure after the turmoil of my early years mentioned at the start, having a man at the foot of her bed was probably one of the worst case scenarios for her. I told her I had gotten my small baseball bat and was coming to her room when I called out her name. I think she knew I was lying to seem tough, but she didn't correct me. She began to describe the man as an old, tall man with a long white beard and crooked teeth. She said he was a solid figure, unlike what I had seen, and the reason she knew he was not a real man was when he started to dematerialize in front of her eyes. She talked as if it was nothing to worry about and she was not afraid, but I could tell this was not like the other things that happened here. This had shaken her. Then just a few months later, we moved out to another government-provided house. I have no idea what she asked the housing department to convince them we needed a different place, but it happened very quickly. And with that, that's the end of my account.